It's in 6:25. Are you ready for them to press in yet? Yeah.
Councillors, chief officers, ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding to welcome the worshipful the Mayor.
Right, good evening, councillors. Before the meeting formally begins, we will start with a blessing from Reverend Sue Mail, who's from Ealing Green Church. Sue?
Good to be here with you. And of course, you'll probably be aware that for Christians, Christmas is fast approaching. And it is, of course, our festival of light. And so we spend a lot of time at this year trying to work out what that light means for us. During the pandemic, I made a video of scrambling around in the dark trying to find my Christmas presents, the light that helped us to see, or the light that helps us to understand. In fact, during Advent, Christians light candles around the Advent wreath. It has 5 candles, 4 around the outside and 1 in the middle. And the 4 around the outside really go a good way to trying to explain what Advent light is, what we're looking forward to. Each of the candles represents hope, peace, joy, and love. And then on Christmas morning, the candle in the middle represents Christ, the Saviour, salvation. And so it seems appropriate because I'm sure you don't all agree with each other when you're in council meetings. I'd be surprised. But I'm also quite sure that you come in order to try to do what you can do to create those things of light, to create hope and joy and love and peace. And so the blessing I'm going to give is simply that hope, love, joy, and peace are the reason behind all that you do in this meeting this evening. To ask God, the God of many names, to be with you and to guide you in all you do. Amen.
Thank you, Sue. I know you've got another meeting to go to, but thank you very much this evening's blessing. Thank you. So welcome members, officers, and people in the public gallery, to everyone watching on YouTube this evening, to the first of two council meetings tonight, an extraordinary meeting followed by the scheduled full council meeting. To those watching online, my name is Councillor Hitesh Taylor. I'm the Mayor of Ealing, and I will be chairing the meeting tonight. So let me first of all thank Sue Mail for providing the blessing tonight. Ealing Green Methodist Church is known for its liberal ethos, and for those interested in visiting, it is next door to the Grove Pub and provides warm places during the cold months. So this first extraordinary meeting is to discuss a matter raised by the main opposition group. But first, some housekeeping, which I won't repeat for the second meeting. But to my right is the Chief Exec, Tony Clements. To his right is Helen Harris, and to my left is Sam Bailey, who will be timekeeping. So if you haven't bribed him by now, it's too late. All right. Tonight's meeting will be broadcast live and a recording retained on the council's YouTube site. Therefore, I presume everyone consents to this happening. If you do not consent to this, then you should leave the meeting now. No one's going. There may be some councillors joining remotely tonight via Teams. If these members will not be counted formally being in attendance at the meeting for the purposes of Section 85 of the Local Government Act 1972, and however their virtual attendance, if they do appear, will be recorded in the minutes under item 1. The members in attendance virtually will be able to speak at the meeting, but won't be able to take part in any votes. So on to item 1. Mr. Bailey, are there any apologies for absence?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have apologies from councillors D. Crawford, Alexander and Rye. And apologies for lateness from Councillor Blacker.
Okay. Are there any councillors online?
Yes, we have a few councillors joining us online this evening. We have councillors Kim Nagpal, Sahota and Coley joining us virtually.
Thank you. All right. Are there any declarations?
Sorry, Councillor Kim Nagpal's just joining for the first half an hour online, and then she'll be here at 7 in person.
Thank you, Councillor Nagpal. Are there any declarations of interest? None. Okay. I therefore move to item 3, which focuses this meeting. I call on Councillor John Ball to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Residents of Meath Court contacted us in September because they felt they were getting nowhere with the majority party councillors they'd contacted, and their situation was just getting worse and worse. When councillors Malcolm Bazutil and I visited, nothing prepared us for just how bad the conditions were. There is mould, condensation, rats, beetles, cockroaches. The lights flicker. The security gate often doesn't work. Even if it does, there's a gap big enough to squeeze through next to it. Many showers don't work, the cookers don't work, and the replacement ones are dangerous. Addicts inject drugs in front of children. The letterboxes all get broken open, so the council vouchers for children get stolen. An entire window unit is hanging off the outside of one of the containers. The place is a sauna in summer, bitterly cold in winter. The side where most of the families live in is bad. The other side, which the manager calls the crazy side, is much worse. There, drug dealers carry out their trade unhindered, and a brothel operates on the top floor with the door open. There's a dead pigeon in one of the communal washing machines, next to where junkies have sex on the laundry room floor. The single security guard is scared for his own life and so locks himself in the office when he sees the dealers and addicts. A Syrian resident said it's worse there than Syria during the war. Residents have found bullets. Intruders into the building forced their way into one flat and attempted a rape. They pushed another resident off the top floor, leaving her in a coma in what could only be a suspected murder. Residents showed us harrowing footage of a local woman performing first aid to keep the victim alive. Families are living there in fear. Vulnerable families some in which both adults and children have significant health conditions. The mothers spoke to us and told us what they had to endure day after day, month after month. It's supposed to be temporary, but one has been there for 5 years. We were horrified. We knew that Meath and Marston courts need to be closed down. We spoke to the chief executive and senior officers. Yes, there is a terrible shortage of temporary accommodation, as we know all too well from our casework, but the conditions we witnessed and heard testimony about are so far beyond acceptable that we knew that action must be taken. We called this emergency council meeting hoping that a meeting could be held quickly. Instead, it's been delayed until immediately before tonight's scheduled meeting, giving the administration time to belatedly take some action. Concerns were raised about the living conditions in these blocks as long ago as 2019, just 2 years after they opened, with an article in The Guardian and both the Children's Commissioner and Shelter describing container flats as unsuitable for children to live in. How did it take 4 years for Cabinet to resolve to close them down? There must be an urgent investigation into the management of these schemes, how they were allowed to get into this disgraceful state, and what can be done to ensure that this stain on Ealing Council's reputation can never happen again. And most importantly, Mr. Mayor, the residents of Meath Court and Marston Court need to be rehoused in humane conditions now. Some of these brave women are in the public gallery tonight. They need to know tonight when they can move out.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. Councillor Busuttil, are you going to second the motion?
Yes, I formally second the motion, Mr. Mayor, and thank you. And thank you for the residents for coming tonight. We should never forget that a house is a home where people live as individuals and bring up families, because we all know that the foundations of a good life are ultimately built on having a safe, decent and affordable home. It's that home that affords security, dignity and opportunities to get on in life. The simple fact is you cannot achieve anything in life unless you have a stable foundation beneath you. So when the residents of Meath Court invited us to visit their dire circumstances, we were compelled to act. There are 3 issues regarding Meath Court that concern me. Firstly, Meath Court has become a haven for crime and antisocial behaviour. When visiting the site, the residents told us that a lady who was visiting a friend had been pushed off the balcony and was in a critical condition in hospital. It has now reached to a point where the majority of the residents in Meath Court, for fear of their own safety and safety of their children, which leads me on to my next point. How are the residents, particularly children, meant to get on in life if they are not only in fear of their safety, but living in cramped conditions with no privacy, no space for children to study, or proper facilities to cook a decent meal? Though Meath Court is deemed as temporary accommodation, some residents have said, as Councillor Ball has said, they're over 5 years. Such conditions and length of time in Meath Court is and will severely impact children's future. Which then leads me on to my third and final point. A recent IFS report states that correlation between low-income households and the cost of housing is a contributor to poverty. So I was shocked to find when visiting the residents, they pay £270 per week for a 1-bedroom container. Add other costs, it's no surprise they're just keeping their heads above water. So as you can see, their current situation means they feel trapped in this vicious circle, and it's no surprise they took to social media about their plight. Meath Court highlights this. This council needs to get a grip with the quality of its housing stock. One of the council's priorities is commitment to fighting inequality. Therefore, housing is a major tool in which the council can tackle inequality. I understand there's been numerous meetings between Councillor Mahfouz and Councillor Anderson with residents of Meath Court, and this has happened recently, and action has been taken to decant these homes and move residents to something safer and more suitable. It's a shame that hasn't been done before
20
Christmas,
seconds, Councillor.
but at least it's on the path to being allocated somewhere more appropriate in the very near future. However, this should have never got to this stage in the first place. Therefore, this must be a moment where things change. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mahfouz, you move the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to thank the residents of Meath Court who have joined us here this evening. I rise, Mr. Mayor, to propose the amendment in my name. And I should say that back in May, I took on this portfolio for safe and genuinely affordable homes here in our borough. It's a responsibility I take seriously. And as part of our action plan for this year, we'd already committed to end the lease prematurely at Marston Court in Hanwell and make sure that we didn't renew the lease at Meath Court in Acton. And we'd also committed to move the families at both sites into alternative, more appropriate accommodation. I approached this task as I do with my reputation for getting things done, with my empathy, with my passion to make sure that we do the things right by the residents at these addresses. So I visited both locations, being accompanied by the leader of the council at Marston Court and by the local member of parliament at Meath. I went to see firsthand the challenges residents were facing, hear from them directly, go into their homes, given my personal assurances of the action that we were going to take and we were taking, and to share my personal contact details with those residents so that they knew they had a Labour council and a Labour cabinet that were on their side. Now, it wasn't going to be good enough that we would be moving people out. But what we wanted to do was wanted to make sure that we were moving people out ideally before Christmas. But also I wanted to make sure that in addition to that, we were taking significant steps to improve the safety on both sites. And having taken that action immediately, at Marston Court, we installed CCTV, got park guard security on the site, secured the laundry room and got the local police to increase their patrols. At Meath, whilst I was on my visit, I took no prisoners. I personally had to tell a drug dealer to turn around and go the other direction, not using such kind language to him. I also obviously spoke to parents and children about the challenges they faced and completely appreciated that we needed to take more action. We've served notices to the on-site perpetrators of the antisocial behaviour. We've taken steps to make the site more secure, and as well as installing and increasing the park guard presence on site. I can tell you, Mr. Mayor, today that we have actually, through a joint operation with the police, arrested one of the perpetrators on the site, and he's been removed from Meath Court today. That's us taking the action that I have promised. But most importantly, I made a commitment to those mums over there that welcome me into their homes and talk to me about their challenges and their hopes and dreams, that we would be looking to as we spoke, to get them, as we speak tonight, getting them moved out and making them offers for a new start elsewhere. Those families have continued to get in touch with me regularly on my phone, by email, and I know that the team have been working tirelessly in a broken housing market, but with empathy and understanding to try and make sure that we find suitable alternatives for every single household who are there. And Mr. Mayor, I know that difference is being made day in, day out. So far, we've moved over 10 families in the last few weeks, and we'll continue to do so until every single family has got a new bit of accommodation. And I just want to say, one mum who recently moved out, and I've been liaising with her over the last few days, texted me earlier today to say, Bassam, I'm so happy. Thank you for everything and all of your support.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Mayor, this isn't just a corporate priority, it's a personal one as well. I'm all about making sure that we take action. And Mr. Mayor, we will not stop until every single family has been moved out into alternative, suitable accommodation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor. All right, Councillor Brett, you're moving the second amendment. Oh, your second amendment, sorry.
Do you want me to say that first? Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, here we are again with the Liberal Democrats not being just 2 steps behind, but 10, attempting to hold the council to account for something that it's already doing. As Councillor Malcolm well knows, from the Cabinet meeting on the 6th of December, which is less than 2 weeks ago, the council is taking all the necessary steps to decommission the housing at Meath and Marsden courts. But this wouldn't be the first time that we've seen them exhibit this level of inability to remember a response to a question. And as I often say to my young son, if you're going to ask a question, please listen to the answer so we don't have to keep repeating the same thing. So I'd like to invite the Liberal Democrats to perhaps take on that mantra. This meeting is not a productive use of public funds or the time of council officers, especially when the Lib Dems have decided the big ticket item for the full council this tonight is around disposable vapes, which is a motion they seem to have copied from their counterparts in Sheffield rather than coming up with anything comprehensive themselves. They've used up what little political capital they have to score points out of people's distress. The council have rightly recognised that Meath and Marston courts are not fit for purpose, And as Councillor Mahfouz has comprehensively outlined, not just in the Cabinet meeting, but here tonight, sorry, hold on a second, that weeks ago, we've already doing all of the things that we've outlined and we've promised to residents. And they will be in alternative accommodation. That is already happening. So I'm going to not spend any more time explaining what was already happening and quite literally has already been outlined by Councillor Mahfouz. But Mr. Mayor, I second this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Gallant, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We as a group, we support the motion as proposed by Councillor Ball for all the reasons cited. Although our group does not feel that this issue was appropriate for an extraordinary council meeting. Meath and Marston Court were already scheduled for closure in the cabinet plan. I have one question, is why the motion didn't include similar construction at Westfield Lodge in Acton, which suffers the same, if not worse, levels of dilapidation, despite going up in 2019. The problem with this motion, it actually invites politicking instead of real analysis and correction. And you can see that in the Labour amendment, which actually thanks Cabinet for its ongoing work in relation to Meath and Marston courts. Whatever vote of thanks is recorded tonight won't be shared by residents that I've met from Meath Court, and they're actually very concerned about their current situation and their future prospects. Mr. Mayor, Meath and Marston are to be decommissioned as soon as is practicable. We all agree on that. Families are to be moved to locations that are safe and secure, ideally in Ealing. And obviously this is desirable, but it's much easier said than done. Now, I asked Councillor Mahfouz, portfolio holder at Cabinet on the 6th of December, whether the council would be offering its full support to the families as they were moved out, and he assured me that they would get that support. So then, of course, he went off on a long tirade against the Conservative government, and that was no surprise. He completely forgot to answer my first question, and which was, why was no appropriate maintenance and security plan put in place for these prefabricated modular buildings at the time of their construction? And this is perhaps the most important question and the key lesson to be learnt from this whole embarrassing episode. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Mason, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, when I became leader, I set out very clearly to my group a new direction for the council, one that was open, transparent and inclusive, setting out the challenges that we know that we faced and also the changes that we needed to make as an administration to stay true to the pledges that we made to our residents. That included Meath and Marston Court. It's why in 2022, when we returned as an administration, we set out clearly in the council plan that modular homes would be decommissioned. And it's why again in 2023, that commitment was redoubled. And our officers continued the work to ensure that we removed ourselves once and for all in the provision of those units. It's a personal commitment as well as a political one. I know what it is like to be a child of a single parent family placed into temporary accommodation. I have the earliest memories in my mind of the experience of turning up to a less than satisfactory home and wondering what the future might bring. The warden's flat of a hostel for men with drug and alcohol issues. Wasn't a pleasant experience. So making sure that we come true on that commitment is absolutely key. And it's one that, as Councillor Mahfouz has set out, that we will continue to do. But I have to tell members, and I'm afraid I also have to tell the public, that the challenges out there in temporary accommodation are very, very deep. Just a few short years ago, Ealing was able to celebrate the end of the use of bed and breakfast type accommodation for those who face the toughest barriers in housing and who find themselves turning up on our doorstep as homeless. These are residents who have the lowest incomes and the greatest barriers to being able to access the private rented sector or even social homes. A few short years ago, we'd ended that practice, but just in the last year alone, not only have we seen people in temporary accommodation skyrocket, but we're now using both bed and breakfast accommodation and commercial hotels for the very first time. What's causing this? Well, I'm afraid to say What's causing this is a degree of hypocrisy from the benches over there. We've had 14 years of benefit freezes secured by a coalition government that included the Liberal Democrats, exacerbated by a Conservative Party, and I'll take no lessons from Councillor Gallant on this issue, exacerbated by the Tories and the Liberal Democrats, who have removed money from the social housing sector. We as a local authority have been doing everything that we can to bring onto stream temporary accommodation as quick as we can. We delivered over 150 units last year, and yesterday's local government settlement announcement with the housing delivery test told us that Ealing, the 20th largest borough in the country, was delivering the third highest number of affordable homes. Just as quick as we can secure genuinely affordable homes, we are making them available to our residents. So I do have to say to the Liberal Democrats, you can't both call an emergency meeting to criticise this administration for doing precisely that which you are asking us to do and have been doing for the last few years. And then Councillor Malcolm go on the public record criticising us for doing it too quickly.
Can you end it?
This administration puts our residents first. We are willing to admit when we need to make a change, and we are committed to delivering that change on behalf of the residents who in this borough need it most. I support the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Next up was Councillor Ty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Others will pay tribute later to Phil Portwood, and I just want to acknowledge the lasting legacy he leaves and say how much he will be missed from all our civic gatherings. Mr. Mayor, I welcome the chance to speak tonight on this debate brought by the opposition, and I want to thank residents and acknowledge them attending in person and acknowledge just how difficult it has been. It is a critical housing matter, and it goes to the heart of why we need a Labour government. At conference in October, we heard of Labour's commitment to tackle the housing crisis and get Britain building again, with a plan to build 1.5 million new homes across the country. We need decent social housing and genuinely affordable homes, but currently we have a housing system that is completely broken, and a future Labour government would not shy from fixing it. What is needed is the plans and the means to do it. And as we'll hear more of tonight, the decimation of local government services from underfunding from this Tory government has placed genuine difficult strains on the services that we can provide. Mr. Mayor, I hope the opposition aren't looking to weaponise what is an extremely difficult situation. The decommissioning of Marston and Meath courts is welcomed across the chamber, and as Councillor Brett has already said, it's already in motion. It is something that all of us, irrespective of party colours, support, and I'm sure none welcome the decision more than residents themselves. These have been genuinely the most difficult cases of casework that I have received since becoming a councillor. We have worked with the cabinet member, council officers and the local police team to do all we can to improve the difficulty of the situation, including installing 24-hour CCTV, continuous communication with the portfolio holder and officers to provide the necessary supports. What we need and what is already underway is a clear plan and full efforts to rehome and accommodate residents being moved. I want to acknowledge the work I've seen from Councillor Mahfouz and from officers trying to progress cases. They are working hard with available options to move people to suitable, safe and secure housing, even though, as we heard from Councillor Mason, it is a very, very deep challenge with limited stock out there. Housing is one of the defining challenges we face as a country. Looking round at the scale of homelessness reminds us of this daily. When it comes to fixing housing, you will hear it loudly from Labour benches. It is a need that is recognised. A Labour council working together with a future Labour government would seek to transform the situation and change the country for the better. Change is needed up and down the country, and for that, Mr. Mayor, we need a general election now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ty. To sum it up, first up is Councillor Mahfouz on the amendment.
Thanks, Chair. So from the Conservatives, who have created the housing crisis, which we are having to deal with on a daily basis, and I receive calls almost daily from families in tears, being evicted from their homes and turning up on our doorsteps to make sure that we can rehouse them. And that's all because the Conservatives have allowed this housing crisis to absolutely spiral in the last couple of years, with half of the number of private rented properties coming off the market, hardly anything that's left that's affordable. that's there. And actually, they've agreed with us tonight that we already had this plan in place. They've agreed that the people in charge would drive it forward and make it happen. But when we talked about it being much easier said than done, that is because of the housing crisis that we find ourselves in because of their government. The Lib Dems this evening, all I've heard is they have asked us to do things that we've already had in train. Well, it's easy to do, isn't it? We know we're doing it. We've already put it on paper. I've already visited the households. I've already given them the assurances. And then the Lib Dems are just trying to ride on those coattails and say, can you please do what you've already said you're going to do? Look, we're already a few steps ahead of you on those things. But in reality, Mr. Mayor, look, this isn't politics. Yes, we've made a political commitment, but it's a personal commitment, you've heard, from both the leader and myself, to deliver this, to do right by the families at these addresses and to make sure that they are moved as soon as possible. Many of them will have new homes for themselves and for their children come Christmas, and for others early in the new year. That's the commitment that we've given, and that's the commitment that we will stick to. So thank you very much, everybody from Meath Court, for coming along this evening. You know you've got my contact details as well. Should you need to contact me in the future, that is an open invitation to stay in touch. And from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for coming along, and we will be supporting you all the way.
Thank you, Councillor Mahfouz. And finally, Councillor Ball, you want to sum up the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Councillor Mahfouz talked about what he's done since May this year, and Councillor Mason since last May. But as I mentioned, concerns have been raised about Meath Court since 2019. So that the wheels have turned extraordinarily slowly over a really long period. Councillor Brett talked about the cabinet decision in December. Again, we called this meeting in October. I welcome Councillor Gallant's support for this motion, but I'm surprised he doesn't feel this issue is urgent enough to warrant an extraordinary meeting. I do, however, take his point about Westfield Lodge. Finally, I can't emphasise enough the urgency of rehousing all residents from Meath Court and Marston Court, and potentially Westfield Lodge, although I haven't seen the circumstances there for myself. And I'm disappointed that we haven't had a final date by which all residents will be rehoused tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. All right. So first of all, we're going to the vote now on these motions. So the amendment has been moved and seconded. So therefore, we'll go to the vote on the amendment first and then the motion. So first of all those in favour of the amendment. Those against? Abstentions? All right, the amendment is therefore carried. I'll now move on to the main motion as it's as amended. So there's the substantive motion that's amended. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? Therefore, the amended motion is therefore carried. So we're going to close the meeting exactly 7 o'clock, but we're going to give you a 5-minute comfort break. Thank you. One more minute, please, councillors. I'm going to start in 1 minute. All right, councillors, we're going to make a start. Do they want us? Hello, Councillor Ball, Councillor Mahfouz, Councillor Gallant, do you want to sit down again? Right, thank you. Good evening once again, members, officers, and members of the public gallery, and to everyone watching online or on YouTube again to the second full council meeting tonight. I'm Councillor Taylor, the Mayor of Ealing, and chairing the meeting tonight. Members, I won't repeat what I said earlier. If you've forgotten, you can play back on YouTube later if we need reminding. So let's get on to the main proceedings, which is item 1. Mr. Bailey, any more apologies for absence?
So in addition to those apologies I announced earlier, I've also received apologies from Councillor Coley. So that is Councillor Wright, Councillor Coley, Councillor D. Crawford, and Councillor Alexander. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mataza, sorry. As well.
Thank you. Have we still got councillors present virtually?
We do indeed. We have Councillor Sahota, Councillor Coley is present virtually, Councillor Kim Nagpal and Councillor Midder.
Oh,
you're here now. Sorry, I could see you on the list here virtually, but yeah, you're present now. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any declarations of interest on any of the items here? Yes, councillor. And
just for transparency, when we come to debate of vapes, I don't have any pecuniary interest, but my brother has a business, so I will be taking part in the debate and voting as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, item 3 then. Minutes of the meeting held on 19th of September. Are those agreed? All right. Thank you. So item 4, mayor's announcements. Let's just start with the sad news you've all been notified of recently. Last week, many members and former councillors and past mayors attended the funeral of past mayor and East Acton councillor Phil Portwood. Now, before I ask councillors from the groups to express their thought, just quickly add my own. He was a well-known figure, of course, in East Acton and known to many of you here. And he sadly passed away in November, age 65. He was, of course, the Mayor of Ealing for the municipal year 1999 to 2000, known as the Millennium Mayor, and was a councillor in East Acton for 22 years, being elected in 6 successive elections in an area that he cherished more than any other. It was Phil who encouraged me to stand in East Acton in 2010 and was very supportive of the work and was particularly supportive of the mayoralty this year. And the last time I saw him was my fundraiser due in September. So I'm just going to ask, is it Councillor Johnson? Councillor Johnson to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Phil used to describe East Acton as God's own country. He thought it was particularly special, and he spent most of his life in East Acton. He had sadly only just moved into a new flat just on the A40 this summer, after having lived in his parents' house and then his grandmother's. So that was very sad. As you said, Phil was born in 1958. His parents, Joan and Bill. Bill was also very local. He worked as a printer in a small company in East Acton, and Joan had started her life in accounts in Barker's in Kensington High Street, which is maybe where Phil got his love of numbers from. They were quite a close family, and they had one other child, that was Lynn, who was at the funeral last week, which many of you attended in this room. Phil went to school locally, John Perrin, and then Faraday, which eventually became part of Acton High School. And as many of you know, he was on the governing body of both those schools. I first met Phil in the early 1980s and was involved in his by-election in 1984. He loved being on the council. He absolutely loved politics. He'd studied politics and American history at Hull, and he really did enjoy those activities. He, as Steve said last week, that he was a cephalogist. He absolutely loved figures. He loved telling us who had served the longest in London, who was the longest serving mayor, etc., etc. And he was always happy to help new people, new councillors, and he was especially good on equal opportunities. He liked to see more women being involved, etc. Phil started work after leaving university at Kensington and Chelsea, where he was a parking officer. And then he moved to Camden, where he became an economic development officer. And he went part-time when he stood for election in Ealing Acton, where he stood against Sir George. And they always had quite a good relationship. Phil used to joke they were both whips, Sir George being a whip in Parliament, etc. And they got on quite well and often swapped stories. He really did like the council. It was his life. He'd been chief whip. He was the chair of finance. He became cabinet member for regulatory. And he was quite sad when he lost his seat. But he had interests outside the council. He'd been on the Health Authority. He was a member of CAMRA. He was the president of the West London Trade Union Club, and that was where we had a celebration afterwards last week. And I think he would have been pleased to know that. The fact he was his funeral was at Mortlake was also quite touching, because he'd been a member of the Mortlake crematorium, and I think that had been requested in his will. Phil did, as I say, absolutely love politics and the council, but he was interested in all sorts of things. He liked music. He liked the old punk groups like Madness, but he also liked Gilbert and Sullivan, believe it or not. And he loved traveling around the country to different parts of Britain, visiting the pubs and special buildings. And he enjoyed his life. He was a very intelligent man. He loved old films. He had an incredible memory. Now, I'm not pretending he was perfect. None of us are perfect. I think we all know that. But towards the end of his life, Phil did stay active. As Miriam reminded me last week, he was very active in the Co-op Party. He tried to attend as many meetings as he could. He had health issues with his heart, which we all knew about, but he tried to attend whatever he could. And he was very helpful to people. And I think he was a character and eccentric, and he will be missed by not just people in Acton, but throughout the whole borough who knew him. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Ball?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Phil was a rare, larger-than-life character who brightened up this chamber, and while always a Labour Party stalwart, made friends in all parties. He was fiercely loyal to his local area. Yvonne mentioned, he repeated his granddad saying that East Acton is God's own country, Eastern Division. Phil was one of the leading experts on the history of Acton and contributed so much to it, both as a ward councillor and through initiatives such as proposing the names for new local streets. When the constitution of the council was reviewed, a working group was assembled, which was nicknamed the Anoraks Committee, of Phil, former councillor Ian Potts, and I. Phil was an absolute expert on those sorts of constitutional matters, and also, as Yvonne mentioned, on cephalological matters. There was rarely an obscure by-election that he did not know the full details of. And beyond merely recalling facts, he did perceptive analysis of results to determine, for instance, the effects of gender, ethnicity and alphabetical order on how many votes each candidate secures in multi-member seats across London. And he represented the Labour Party at hearings of the Boundary Commission for the London constituencies. In all these sorts of activities, his infectious joy at the details and the connections shone through. I rather think he would have made an excellent professor of political science, actually. As the Millennium Mayor, Phil had a beer brewed in his honour and made it a point of honour to visit every pub in the borough during his year in office. In subsequent years, I'd often see him using a pub table as an office with his laptop and council papers, as well as a pint of real ale, or subsequently the papers of one of the many other public bodies he devoted his talents to, such as the NHS Ealing CCG. And he was always happy to take a break for a chat. So yes, he contributed his great mind and supreme attention to detail to organisations as diverse as a number of NHS bodies, the Association of Local Government, various Acton and Park Royal charitable and community bodies, London Fire Authority, CAMRA, and even the Intellectual Property Regulation Board. Phil Portwood was a one-of-a-kind individual and a man of great humour and warmth who will be sadly missed both in this chamber and in East Acton.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Gallant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, Phil Portwood's East Acton councillor, 22 years, and the Millennium Mayor. Encyclopedic knowledge of local government. In fact, I think the only person he actually feared was a former councillor, Ian Potts, who challenged him on that knowledge, but actually didn't, possibly. But I actually got to know Phil through Acton Charities. We were trustees of Acton Charities. And I remember attending my first meeting back in 2015. It was a meeting that started at 6 and finished at 6:45. I thought, that's the kind of meeting I like, nice and short. And I was just sloping off home, and he said, no, quick one in the pub. And I remember what time I got into the pub. I'm not quite sure what time I actually left the pub, because we had a long chat. And it was a very important chat for me as a very green person, long before I got elected, but a very green Conservative chairman of the association, yes. But it showed me that there was a useful and fascinating and fabulous conversation to be had across the party lines. And I hope that's a wonderful legacy that Phil's left us.
Thank you, Councillor. Can all members perhaps join me in observing a minute's silence for Phil? Thank you. Right, on to other announcements. So first of all, we had the visit of His Royal Highness the King Charles III to Ealing on December the 7th. It was a very successful visit, shown by the massive crowd that came to Ealing Broadway Shopping Centre. So we've been quite lucky in Ealing this year to receive both the King and Queen this particular year. The Navratri season took place in October, although mine was curtailed through COVID. We visited several temples and attended several events for Diwali and the Gujarati New Year. Thanks to all members who attended the remembrance services last month, Ealing Synagogue for its annual civic service, and the Hanukkah celebration here last Monday as well. October also saw the opening of the new Filmworks Cinema complex across the road. And I thank Councillor Midha, she's here, for deputising for me on that occasion. this one creates for me, but Councillor Newsom and I did, courtesy of Brentford Community Sports Trial, get to see Brentford v Luton, but we're not going to talk about the result. Congratulations to Councillor Camwell Baines, who had a baby boy on the 3rd of December, and the proud grandparents, Councillors Ranjit and Harbhajan Cordia. Belated birthday greeting to several councillors, including Councillor Raza, who's had a significant one recently. And congratulations also to Councillors Mahfouz, he's not here, and Stafford, he is here, on their respective selections of the GLA and parliamentary candidates. Right, a few things to look forward to. So best wishes to all of you for Christmas, a chance to see your family and friends, and for me to fix a leak in my flat I've just discovered today. My New Year civic service at the Sri Jawaharlal Mandir in Greenford that's happening on 7th of January. I look forward to seeing many of you there, especially my acting colleagues. If you haven't already done so, please confirm with Cheryl. Thai Pongal is coming up in January. This is the Harvest Festival celebrated by the Tamil community. The annual Holocaust Memorial Day event has been held on Friday, 26th of January. Details to follow. We've got a mayoral fundraiser planned for Friday, 26th of January, with details to be sent out also in January. This will be held at the Bakara Centre in Southall. We also have the annual Krell service scheduled for Sunday, 4th of February at St Mary's Church in Acton. The plans for LGBT History Month in February, and there'll be some events led by the West London Queer Project. And after the meeting today, councillors are welcome to come upstairs for refreshments in the new Civic Suite. I've invited members of my charity to come along. So I will thank Councillor Young for his generous donation. So if councillors also wish to follow Councillor Young in his generosity, Cheryl will have the credit card machine available. With that, let's get on to main business. Right, item 5, petitions for members of the public. Are there any? There are none. Item 6, we're not aware of any petitions from members of the council. No. And question 7, which is questions from members of the public. So first of all, David Devine has given notice that he wishes to ask a question of Councillor Sheetal Munro, Cabinet Member for Good Growth and New Homes. Mr. Devine, are you here? Go ahead. Yeah.
Good evening. My question is, why is it necessary to use taxpayers' money to purchase the Greenbelt land at Down Barnes Farm to only build 6 traveller pitches when you already own enough land and could use a brownfield site, especially after the Prime Minister's statement in July about the misuse of Greenbelt land?
Councillor Mahfouz, you've got 3 minutes to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Devine. I think your wife also asked this question as well, so both of you, and for coming to full council today to ask this question. Look, the process of developing a local plan is highly technical and is governed by strict regulations and requirements. This process is one also of the key ways that a council works to meet the needs of our diverse communities, in this case, through how our land and physical space is used and managed. Our evidence has demonstrated a need for 6 gypsy and traveller pitches in the borough. We commissioned an extensive study to identify potential sites for these pitches and then consulted on 2 options as part of the Regulation 19 stage of the local plan. The proposal for the pitches in the Regulation 19 version of the plan, which will be published in the first quarter of next year, will be based on the consultation, responses, and consideration of the balance between use and likely deliverability. Sorry. There will often be competing demands for different land uses, and a local plan process allows the holistic consideration of these demands across the borough and ensure we plan to meet our range of needs as required by regional and national policy. All stakeholders, including residents, can submit comments on the Regulation 19 plan. This will be considered by the Planning Inspectorate, and those comments at Regulation 19 stage may also be interested in attending the examination in public of the plan. With regard to your reference to the Prime Minister's statement about greenbelt land, the Council's proposals will be entirely in line with government guidance on this, which states that it is acceptable to alter the defined greenbelt boundary to accommodate a specific identified need for a gypsy and traveller site through the plan-making process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Devine, do you have a supplementary question?
We understand the council is obliged to find a site for the GRT community. Does it have to be at the cost of the only farm left in the borough which provides a necessary service for handicapped children? Would the money needed to purchase the land not be better used to fund the GRT site on land already owned by the council and keep some of our council services running after the government cuts inflicted on the council?
Thank you, Mr. Devine, for your question. I think you may be running further ahead of the process. So we've done a Reg 18 consultation. There are 2 sites that we consulted on, and we're going through the consultation, what we received in terms of people's views on that consultation to come to a conclusion. We haven't yet come to a conclusion as to which site will be selected. So therefore, I think it's premature at the moment for us to actually go through and, you know, you're assuming it's one site or the other. We haven't yet come to that conclusion. When we do, and we will publish in the first quarter next year, the Reg 19, which will allocate a site. And that's when we can have further communication and I can come and meet with you depending on which site is chosen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Devine. Is Toby Dalton here? So Toby Dalton has also given notice he wishes to ask a question of Councillor Shatama Rowe.
My name is Toby Dalton and since 1960s. We currently run an 80 grass-fed beef cattle herd with a 30-horse stable yard used by local communities which provide greener and outdoor activities, including well-being. In 2011, we lost over 100 acres of grassland to a golf course, leaving us with just 25 acres. If we lose any more land, it would make our farm unviable. Why are you threatening the closure of the last working farm and stable yard in Ealing?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Dalton, and for coming to full council this evening to ask it. First, allow me to thank you for your time yesterday. It was good to meet with you and hear more about the farm. I know that you have some concerns, and I'm of course available to work through these if you want to discuss those further. It is important for us to meet the requirements of planning law and the needs of marginalized communities by including provision for the required space for gypsy and traveller pitches in our local plan. The Regulation 19 version of the local plan will be published in the first quarter of next year and will make a site allocation for 6 gypsy and traveller pitches. If that site allocation is within Barnes Farm, that doesn't automatically mean that the pitches will be delivered and that the council is not threatening the closure of the farm. We want to and need to work with the owners and occupants of any allocated land to do that. As we discussed when I came to visit the farm earlier this week, the plot of land that the council has identified as a potential site for the 6 pitches is only a very small geographical area and a small proportion of the overall site, which we hope will limit the impact on the farm if the farm is selected. That's not sorted out yet. Once we've completed the Reg 19 version of the local plan, we are all, of course, committed to working with any residents or businesses affected. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Dalton, do you have a supplementary question? Okay, thank you for your timely question. Right, members, going to move on to the next item, item 8, which is questions from members of the council. We've got half an hour to 8 o'clock. So the first question I've got is from Councillor Mohammed to Councillor Cam Nagpal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In April of this year, this council voted to make experience of care a protected characteristic. Following that, multiple teams across the organisations made commitments to improve access to services and support for care leavers. Can the portfolio holder provide an update on progress toward implementing those commitments? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mohammed. In April of this year, we took a significant step by voting to make experience of care a protected characteristic when it comes to accessing council services. This was our way of recognising how much of an impact experience of care has on the life chances of young people in our borough and the importance of carefully supporting them as they transition from care settings. Today, I'm pleased to share the strides we have made in translating this commitment into tangible improvements in our policies and practices. These are all on topics identified by care leavers as impacting their lives. The Care Leavers Summit pledges have seen commendable progress, with 47% already achieved, 48% on track, and the remaining 5% under regular review to ensure continuous advancement. Our initiatives are varied, from ring-fenced apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship programs to free training for staff focusing on key areas that affect care leavers. Housing options for care leavers, a critical concern, will take centre stage at the upcoming Corporate Parent Committee in January, addressing the theme of independent, affordable housing options for our care leavers. We've also introduced a dedicated housing officer, a way to identify those leaving care with our housing database in order to offer them targeted support and 12 ring-fenced affordable opportunities in private housing developments for care leavers. Collaborations across the council, partnerships with TfL for discounted transport and waiving prescription charges for care leavers by the NHS North West London Health Trust shows how we are working across public services to support our care leavers. We recently launched the Care Leavers app, Ealing Cares, on the 1st of November as part of National Care Leaver Week. The app was designed by young people with experience of care and is already getting a lot of use. And on November 17th, we hosted Take Over the Council Day, where care leavers were put into positions of responsibility across the council. The adoption of care experience as a protective characteristic within Ealing is an ongoing programme. While we're forging ahead with local interventions, the national landscape is evolving and we are actively contributing to the broader discourse on the significance of this new status.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there anybody from the Labour Group who has a supplementary question to ask?
Yes.
Councillor Nagpal.
Can the portfolio holder give a short verbal update on the Care Leavers Take Over the Council Day?
Councillor Nagpal, do you want to answer?
Thank you, Councillor Nagpal, for your question. Last month, we opened the council's doors to some of Ealing's care leavers to take over leadership positions from across the council, including the Chief Executive, Strategic Director of Children's Services, and my very own portfolio. It was exciting to witness the potential, creativity, and determination of our care leavers and potential future leaders. I had the pleasure of visiting Springhallow School with our young temporary cabinet member. We were particularly impressed with their spring cafe, which was designed and constructed by pupils. We also visited a SEND exhibition designed by Ealing's children with special educational needs and disabilities. And our young cabinet member for the day also received a briefing from our assistant director for SEND and provided valuable contributions as a person with lived experience of SEND. The council takeover day wasn't conventional work experience. It was about more than just observation. It was about empowering our young people to make decisions, face dilemmas, and giving them a meaningful role in influencing the services we provide for the community. The success of the council takeover day far exceeded our expectations, with the contributions of these young individuals showcasing extraordinary depth of insight, enthusiasm, and fresh perspectives which are often overlooked. We received excellent feedback from the young people who took part, and I even heard a few of them say that they might look at working for the council one day. So we potentially have that to look forward to.
Thank you. Question 2 is Councillor Malcolm to Councillor Jasbir Anand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ealing, like many London boroughs, has many trans residents. Could Councillor Anand comment on the awful proposed law by Liz Truss that would ban trans women from single-sex spaces and prevent under 18s from transitioning?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Malcolm, for your question. I share your concerns about the potential impact of this legislation on the rights and dignity of trans individuals, particularly in Ealing. This is an incredibly emotive issue, and I'd like to openly admit that I'm not an expert in trans rights, and I would like to encourage us all to approach this topic with open-mindedness and empathy for the views and lived experiences of our colleagues and constituents. Mr. Mayor, this bill proposed by a woman who has failed this country on more fronts than I can count is not designed to benefit anyone, but to sow division. At its core, this bill is prejudiced and transphobic, and I would question its compliance with Article 14 of the Human Rights Act. Mr. Mayor, unilaterally banning trans women from single-sex spaces implies a denial of their gender identity and perpetrates harmful stereotypes that have long marginalized the transgender community and sought to prevent their full participation in society. Seeking to restrict access to gender transition support and medical care for under 18s demonstrates an alarming lack of empathy for young people grappling with their gender identity and reveals a total lack of commitment to their well-being. Mr. Mayor, in Ealing, we pride ourselves on fostering an inclusive and accepting community that celebrates diversity. Mr. Mayor, in an environment in which transphobic crimes are increasing, political leaders are stoking division, and transgender people's fears for their safety are increasing. I encourage us all to stand in solidarity with our trans neighbors and work to create spaces where everyone, regardless of their gender identity, is respected, heard, and supported.
Thank you. Is there anybody from the Liberal Democrat group with a supplementary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I first of all thank the portfolio holder for her views and position on this matter. I know that you are supportive of trans rights, and will you call upon Keir Starmer to reverse his position so we can all support self-identification, which he abandoned earlier in the summer?
Councillor.
Mr. Firstly, let's, as a council, firmly reject this trust bill because it amounts to prejudice, transphobia, and homophobia, which is direct violation of the Article 14 of Human Rights Act. And this proposed bill appears to be a knee-jerk reaction to a moral panic rather than something that would benefit the general public in any way. Mr. Mayor, Liz Truss bill is creating the type of rhetoric that will only deny trans identities and will also roll back the rights of non-binary people, contributing to a growing human rights problem Mr. Mayor, this needs to be addressed by Liz Truss. Stop bringing in other politics to address issues which relate to this bill.
Thank you. Next up, I've got Councillor Conti to Councillor Mahfouz.
Thank you. I've recently been informed by an officer that there's a significant backlog for licence applications for private landlords where applications submitted in January 2023 have yet to be processed. How long is the current backlog and why did the Cabinet member allow this to happen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Conti, for the opportunity to talk about our incredibly successful selective licensing scheme and how successful it has been to date. So in June last year, let's just hark our memories back to then, we applied as a council to the Secretary of State because we had to have their permission to roll out our ambitious plans to support the thousands of residents who reside in private rented accommodation across our borough by approving our plans for a selective licensing scheme across 2/3 of our borough. And ultimately, that is what this is all about protecting the rights and of those residents who are living in private rented accommodation. Because on this side of the chamber, we believe in ensuring that people renting in the private sector have somewhere to live that's safe, secure, and well managed. It appears, as we went out, that it's a commitment that's very much met by a significant proportion of private landlords across the borough too. Having pushed a call to action to landlords in a truncated period because of the length of time it took for the Secretary of State to come back to us to approve the scheme, what we've actually seen is initial expectations for a response based on what other boroughs have seen when they've implemented. So in other boroughs, they got a response of about 10 to 20% of landlords responding within the first year. But I'm delighted to say, thank you, Councillor Conti, for giving us the opportunity to say, is that in Ealing, we've actually smashed that and we got 37% of landlords applying in the first year. Testament to the numbers of landlords who do take their responsibilities seriously enough to apply on time. The team are currently working through over 15,000 applications to ensure compliance or seek further information, or where appropriate, arrange follow-up appointments. And we are recruiting additional people into roles to support the scheme as we take it to the next stage of what is a 10-year programme. You might call it long-term decisions and investment to deliver the change this country desperately needs. So, Councillor Conti, yes, I can confirm that this administration is focused on using the powers that we have sought to protect those residents living in increasingly volatile private rented sector, especially when so many are facing no-fault evictions, massive hikes in their rents at the hands of incompetent excuse of a government and their economic mismanagement.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there a supplementary from the Conservative group?
Well, there is, but he didn't actually, Councillor Mahfouz, he didn't actually answer my question. How long is the backlog? So how long are residents expected to, or landlords expected to wait for the outcome of their licence applications? And how can residents and tenants have any confidence in the scheme when you can't even get the licenses processed in any due time? 12 months, almost 12 months, is an unacceptable length of time.
So I'm not quite sure whether Councillor Conti supports the scheme, whether he supports residents in private rented sector, or whether he, well, no, so ultimately, Mr. Mayor, this is about whether he supports residents living in the private rented sector when half the properties, half the properties, half the private rented sector has been decimated by not a Labour government, not by a Lib Dem government, but by a Tory government. Yeah, the Tories have decimated their own private rented sector landlords. They're fleeing the market because they cannot afford to pay these extortionate mortgage rates that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng threw upon them. Yeah, they don't want to be paying their 5+%, 6+% interest rates, and their tenants certainly don't. So you're taking out half the properties off the market. People are scrambling around. 1 in 50 properties is now affordable. And you have the audacity, Councillor Conti, to stand there and ask me about some figment of your imagination of being a backlog. There's no backlog, right? No, because what happens is once you've got your application sorted, you've then got a 5-year license from that point. So if you have to wait for it to be processed, Yeah, you're still fine though, aren't you? And when you get it, you've got 5 years on that. It's a 10-year program. Okay. Does he want us to have thousands of people processing everything within a day, recruiting them on 0-hour contracts? Because that's what they would do, wouldn't they? They probably. Sorry, Councillor Conti, do you want to send me a text message with a few mates that you could probably get it done for us on a special sort of, maybe they've just finished doing some PPE contracts and you want them to do some of these for us? I don't know. Honestly, look, ultimately the Tories have to decide whose side they're on. We're on the side of people who are hardworking, impacted by the cost of living crisis that they put on people. And that's what we're going to be doing.
Okay. All right. Next question, question for Councillor Raza to Councillor Blacker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does the portfolio holder agree with me that the recent autumn statement fails to address the funding crisis at the heart of our NHS, caused by 13 years of Tory mismanagement?
Thank you, Councillor Raza. I absolutely do agree with you. It will shock you. The autumn statement remained conspicuously silent on many critical issues, leaving the well-being of our residents hanging in the balance. The Chancellor's failure to prioritise social care speaks volumes about this Tory government's misplaced priorities and lack of empathy for those who depend on essential services. The NHS represents so much of what is great about Britain, but like so many other elements of this country, it has struggled under 13 years of Conservative government inattention and underfunding. The NHS workforce is on its knees, our hospital buildings are crumbling, and people in increasingly urgent need of medical care are languishing on waiting lists, despite the Prime Minister's broken promise to cut those waiting lists, which have trebled under the Conservatives. And instead, the Prime Minister blames NHS staff for the problem. 1 million more patients are sitting on NHS waiting lists compared to this time last year. They're struggling in pain and discomfort, and in many cases, their lives are on hold until they get treatment. Now, those numbers are huge, so it can be easy to forget the human cost of those inadequacies. I spoke to someone recently whose 25-year-old brother is having to undergo life-altering brain surgery a second time purely because he had to wait too long for follow-up radiotherapy. Not only is that heartbreaking on an individual level for himself, for his family and his friends, it is staggeringly inefficient for the health system. And we feel the ripples of a struggling NHS in our communities. Waiting lists mean more pressure on adult social services as we try to support people with treatable conditions. Health issues which start small escalate through difficulty in getting a GP or physiotherapy appointment. Manageable mental health spirals through lack of access to relatively low intervention therapy options like talking therapy. And that is even before we get on to trying to see an NHS dentist. Our NHS can transform lives, but its potential is being squandered thanks to basic failure to prioritise the health and well-being of our residents.
Thank you. Has anybody from the Labour Group got a supplementary? Councillor Wesson.
Can the portfolio holder provide an update on the engagement with recipients of direct payments?
Thank you, Councillor Wesson. Again, I can. In recent weeks, we have been meeting with recipients of direct payments. These encounters were not just routine check-ins, they were windows into people's lives and gave us really useful insight into the transformative power of direct payments. The stories I heard gave me confidence that direct payments really do help to create more supportive communities. Carers, in many ways, the unsung heroes of healthcare, shared their experiences of feeling more recognised and appreciated. Now, the flexibility offered by direct payments allowed them to better tailor their caregiving approach to each person, leading to more fulfilling and effective support and better and more meaningful relationships. And what really resonated with me was the positive feedback we've had from the direct payments user group. Their testimonies about finding a new sense of freedom and choice through use of direct payments were powerful. They made it clear that direct payments are not just financial transactions, but catalysts for empowerment and more independence. Too often, public services and institutions write off the personal agency of those in need and receipt of care and support. The mindset that is better, cheaper, or more efficient to take a one-size-fits-all approach is common in health and social care settings. But the qualitative and the quantitative evidence from direct payments is that placing the power to make decisions squarely in the hands of those on whom that money is spent, by doing that, we are creating benefits for both individuals and communities. I lost my place slightly. Direct payments may make the same or similar options available to those without financial means, as are available to those who can afford them in their own right. They're therefore tools that enable people to navigate life's challenges with dignity and choice. Direct payments therefore are and will remain a key component of our offer to Ealing residents in need of care and support.
Thank you. Next question, which might generate some noise in here, is Councillor Young to Councillor Newston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the council plan that we debated at our last council meeting in September 2023, we were promised that the first meetings of the so-called town forums would be held by December 2023. What has gone wrong?
Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Young. And as you well know, we have committed to re-engineering town forums to truly represent the people of Ealing. And where the old ward forums saw the same old faces again and again, we will create a different culture of civic involvement, one where the voices of everyone are included, especially those who are most traditionally marginalised and excluded from decision-making about their community, such as young people, parents, carers, and people who do not speak English as a first language. This is not a quick fix, and we need to do it right. So since the summer, we've been talking with and listening to residents about how they want to engage with town forums and with the council. We've been hearing about how important it is to them in their communities and how they want to get involved in making Ealing a better place to live and grow. And between July and November, 32 in-person engagement events took place, many of them in areas where we have never had engagements at this level. And we heard from nearly 500 residents, including school kids and the volunteer community and faith sector from right across our borough. Most had never taken part in ward forums, and it was their first experience talking about how they thought they could support their local community and what civic participation means to them. As well as the in-person responses, we had another 490 online, which I'm sure you'll agree is excellent. The level of qualitative information based on in-person conversations has given us invaluable insight in how we build trusted partnerships for the long term and develop sustainable and resilient communities. We are really looking forward to holding workshops in each of the 7 towns in the new year, which I'm sure that as local councillors you will want to be involved in, where local people will be invited to hear feedback from the process so far and hear what their neighbours and communities have said in terms of how they want to run their town forum model and work out what model best meets their needs. I can't emphasise enough that the quality of the conversations that this approach has enabled us to have. And so while, of course, we always aim to meet project timelines, in this instance, the very slight overrun has been in the service of a vastly improved outcome.
Oh, thank you. Anybody from the survey group has a supplementary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Was scrutiny correct when it said that ward forums were successful at involving local people in local decision-making in a way that area committees failed to achieve?
I don't know what scrutiny you're referring to, but I believe very strongly that we need to do this better, because the old ward forums were in fact an opportunity for colleagues and councillors, particularly the ones that don't actually have any power because they're not in power, to grandstand and feel important in their communities. We want to do this differently, where people are actually in charge of the decisions that they make about their communities and are not preached to by councillors in terms of how they ought to be doing things. We will do this right. We will take the time it takes to engage with people who have never considered that the council or having conversations with their councillors was for them. People who have never felt they've had a voice, who are having conversations with us now across the borough and feeling empowered, engaged, included and wanted as part of that dialogue for the first time. So we will take the time to do this right, and we will engage all of the communities. And I am sure that when we come to those meetings that you will be active participants, and I very much look forward to all of our residents of all of our communities having the opportunity to be part of the process. Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to finish at 8 o'clock. So the next penultimate question I've got is Councillor Nihar to Councillor Jasbirnand.
Thank you. Can the portfolio holder please provide an update on the delivery of the Safer Ealing for Women's programme, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Nija, for your question. Over the last year, we've been delivering on the Safer Ealing for Women programme, and this is a vital initiative in our commitment to ensuring the safety and well-being of women in our community. And I'm pleased to be able to give full council an update on this work. Our male violence against women and girls strategy has 4 components: prevention, stronger support, holding perpetrators to account, and developing a community coordinated response. It was so co-created with the active involvement of residents, including 3,000 women who participated in the Safer Ealing for Women listening exercise. The input of women from across the borough has been invaluable and has shaped our actions and initiatives. Mr. Mayor, we addressed the concerns raised by the listening exercises and have taken concrete steps to enhance safety. For example, over 90% of women highlighted the importance of improved street lighting, which led to increased illumination in all residential roads and upgraded of 3,100 street lighting columns. We responded to the need of increased surveillance and have installed 24 new high-definition CCTV cameras across the borough and upgraded 20 existing ones. In total, Mr. Mayor, we have 44 high-definition CCTV cameras in the borough. Recognizing the importance of accessible support, we've launched a dedicated website serving as a one-stop shop for advice and links to local support groups for women and girls facing misogyny or unwanted sexual behavior. Mr. Mayor, this year, we've also delivered a healthy relationship education program to secondary schools, reaching out to 1,500 young people, including boys. Specialist training for frontline professionals on domestic abuse and victim support has also been a priority. Mr. In close collaboration with the Metropolitan Police Service, we've organized a walk and talk events led by women police officers and awareness and engagement events about the male violence against women and girls. As part of our ongoing commitment, we are conducting a follow-up survey to gauge the community's response to actions taken and gather insights for future steps. I encourage all women and girls to participate in this survey and share their ideas via our dedicated website.
Thank you. Is there a supplementary from the Labour Group?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What discussions has the portfolio holder had with police colleagues regarding the potential impact of their right care, right person policy on availability of police resource to prevent and investigate violence against women and girls?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Gemma, for your very, very good question. The operational impacts of right care, right person are not yet fully understood, Mr. Mayor, given that it is a new approach being taken by the Metropolitan Police. For the avoidance of doubt, right care, right person is a national policing model developed by Humberside Police and backed by the Home Office. Its aim is to improve outcomes to people requiring emergency mental health support by changing the way that the police respond to calls for assistance which aren't directly related to policing or crime. Mr. Mayor, while we know that this could free up much needed police time for targeted policing interventions, it of course has an impact on other health and care organizations, the NHS and local authorities particularly. So it does present us with a challenge. But I have been having ongoing discussions with the police on this issue, and our Safer Ealing partnership meetings have been focused on our collective commitment to the well-being and safety of our residents, including that of women and girls. Mr. Mayor, for example, we have explored ways to optimize the deployment of resources to prevent and investigate violence against women and girls in the early stages of the right care, right person implementation. We are monitoring local feedback closely and no significant concerns have been raised. The discussion that we have been convening have supported this, and we will try at all times to keep the Met focused on local priorities, including the overarching mission to ensure the safety and well-being of women and girls in our borough. Mr. Mayor, I will continue to hold the police to account as a constructive and challenging partner to ensure that people do not fall through the cracks because of lack of joint up working, as we saw happen with care in the community in the 1980s. Myself and colleagues across the council will work to ensure that the safety of women and girls remains at the forefront of our shared mission and of local policing. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ann. We're at the end, but I will just allow the first question only on the last question. Councillor Hamidi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In light of brand new cinema opening up in Ealing Broadway since our last full council meeting, can the portfolio holder share what work she is currently doing to support the cultural sector in our borough, particularly in regard to broadening access and addressing geographic disparities across our 7 towns?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing that question, and thank you, Councillor Hamidi, for asking it. Firstly, I'm delighted that we do have the new Picture House in Ealing. It's been a long time coming, and it's proving a fantastic addition to Ealing. I've recently led a brilliant team in submitting our ambitious bid to become the GLA's London Borough of Culture in 2025. We built on the foundations of the Ealing Cultural Manifesto. Here it is, for all those who haven't seen it, which aims to turbocharge arts, culture, and creative industries, inspiring more creative people, more creative communities, and more creative people. At the heart of the bid is our belief that all Ealing residents have something to offer, and through residents co-creating and attending cultural events and venues. The bid supports this through reducing disparity and access to arts, and will include cultural hubs supported by local curators and producers. And I know that the Mayor is going to hurry me up, so I'm just going to move on to very briefly make a call for people to support the bid. So they could visit www.ealing2025.org, help spread the word about the bid, and let the GLA know that Ealing is a brilliant place for our creatives. It's a really, really strong bid. It will bring £2 million worth of funding to the borough to support our cultural community and bring great creative jobs. So please, I'm assuming hoping we have the support across the bench. Wish us luck. We have to wait till March to find out. But either way, Ealing and our brilliant creatives are most definitely the winners in my book. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. As we bring down a curtain on that item, we shall move on to item 9, which is the opposition group motion for debate. So I call on Councillor Hirsch to move the opposition group motion for debate. And you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to propose this motion concerning disposable vapes. The fact that other councils have done similar things actually just signifies how important that is, and that Ealing Council too should take note and take additional actions. Vaping was meant for smokers to help them quit smoking. It's currently considered to be much less harmful than tobacco smoking. As a consequence, a huge industry has kicked off producing and offering all sorts of vapes in all sorts of variations to all sorts of audiences. They have not always attracted current smokers and are not always used as smoking cessation products. The worst of these are disposable vapes, which are cheap. They come in candy-like colors and flavors, and they have found a new market, and that market is children and teenagers. They are the worst kind because they serve absolutely no purpose for this audience, because they are most often not smokers. They are just developing a new habit. A habit which is unhealthy because these products very often are loaded with chemicals which are hazardous. They are used for very short periods of time, so become very quickly rubbish. But it's a dangerous rubbish because the lithium batteries in these products catch fire in private homes, in bins, in public spaces, and so are a fire hazard. So there is a health problem, a safeguarding problem, a fire hazard, and an environmental issue. So no benefit inside at all. Therefore, the council should do everything in its power to push, 1, the legislation to make these vapes illegal as soon as possible, but also, and right now, to use all its available tools in its arsenal
to stop the sale of these disposable vapes. Not only check on traders who are selling illegal products or selling them illegally to underage users, but also to use its full licensing powers to prevent premises to sell these in the first place. These products are damaging to our residents and especially to young people and the environment. And they deserve that we use all of our powers to really protect them from harm. So I propose this motion to the council. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Steed, you're going to second the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to second the Liberal Democrat motion this evening. What is so depressing actually on this whole topic, those of us of a certain age, well, I think we're most of us of a certain age anyway, will remember the response in previous years, going back maybe 40, 50 years, of the smoking industry, and how exactly the giants of that industry respond to public health issues such as this. Reports in both The Guardian and The Times this past couple of weeks indicate that in the face of declining global cigarette sales, the likes of BAT Industries and Philip Morris are funding scientific papers on vaping that play down the risks to children and attempt to obstruct public health measures. Doctors, scientists, and so-called independent activist groups campaign to ensure that the UK retains its unrestricted approach in contrast to other countries in imposing bans and/or higher taxes. And as my colleague, Councillor Hirsch, refers to, Britain is facing an epidemic of youth vaping, with more than 1 in 5 children under 18 having tried an e-cigarette. In October, according to The Times, a 12-year-old asthmatic girl who was a heavy vapor suffered a collapsed lung and was put in a coma for 4 days. Despite the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, brought in as a result of the industry's decades-long effort to lie and to cover up deadly consequences of smoking, currently denying the link of vaping and the addiction to nicotine. In contrast, the World Health Organization opposes vaping and argues against it being a smoking cessation tool. The World Health Organization has launched a new Stop the Lies campaign to highlight tobacco companies' attempts to influence health policy. Yet, research in Australia has found clear evidence that non-smokers who use e-cigarettes are 3 times more likely to take up conventional smoking as their peers who do not use e-cigarettes. The average 20 milligram vape contains the same concentration of nicotine as up to 40 cigarettes. Illegal disposable vapes, popular among 18s, can deliver even higher dosage of nicotine. The Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids claims that companies are using aggressive tactics to sell tobacco products to those in the younger age groups. This should come as no surprise, because it's exactly what the tobacco companies did in the 1950s and 1960s. And
Do you
even the
want to
70s.
wind it up?
It took many years for governments worldwide to accept the harmful effects of cigarettes, and even longer for them to take action against the smoking producers. Hopefully lessons have been learned, and that their attempts to bolster their revenue by exploiting children in particular will be thwarted, and serious legislation will be introduced and added regulation. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next up is Councillor Blacker to move the amendment.
Thank you, Mayor, and I so move the amendment first of all. But can I secondly thank the opposition for giving us a chance to talk about some of the fantastic work this Labour Council has been doing and will be doing in the near future. I don't necessarily understand the political strategy of highlighting what a good job we're doing running this council, but frankly, that's their problem, not mine. We should probably save it for Baz's leaflets. Ealing Lib Dems endorse actions of Labour administration. But joking aside, we should acknowledge and thank regulatory and public health teams for the work they are doing against our ambitious council plan that this administration's put forward. Ealing should be a place where we can all lead healthy lives, and the new project that will kick off in January across public health and trading standards will make a real difference. And just the other day, we heard from Wes Streeting, the Shadow Secretary of State for Health, in response to an article about exactly the concerns raised about the big effect of big tobacco, to say he will come down like a ton of bricks on the industry. And I think we all welcome that, and we welcome the prospect of Wes at the Department for Health. But what to do about disposable vapes is a fine and worthy public policy discussion. There are tangible harms to address, impacts on individuals and on communities. But local government across the country is reaching breaking point. The cost of living crisis has driven so many families to the brink. Waiting lists are at a record high, as I said, and the Tory government has no plans to save our NHS. We are at most a year away from a general election, possibly only months. And in just 2 years, our residents will start looking to all of us to outline our visions for this borough in the local elections that will be just a few months further down the line. I'm very happy to discuss vaping and smoking. I'd love to come to talk to Health Scrutiny about our new smoking cessation service and recruit cross-party support for my letter to the Secretary of State about the funding we are receiving for it. Councillor Brett would love, I'm sure, to talk more about our fantastic trading standards teams. But right here is where we come together to discuss the biggest issues, where we should be clashing not on small issues, but over the best ways to ensure every resident in Ealing has a meaningful job that pays a decent living income, has a safe and generally affordable home, over a roof over their heads, able to live a long and healthy life in a thriving community. So while it's fantastic we stand here and congratulate ourselves for some of the work that we're doing, there are bigger problems, problems that can only be addressed when not only are we running this council and doing great things here, but we've got Wes Streeting at the Department of Health and Keir Starmer in number 10. And I'm so glad to have your support for it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Costigan, you want to second the amendment?
I second the amendment. Mr. Mayor, 5 million single-use vapes are binned every week in the UK. Manufacturers claim vapes are recyclable, but that's a fairy story. In reality, vapes are complicated products that have to be pulled apart in a labour-intensive and expensive way. Less than 1% of people bring disposable vapes back to the shop for recycling. In Ealing, you can bring your vapes to Greenford Depot, or we'll pick them up at the curbside in a separate bag of small electricals. But the vast majority of vapes end up in our black wheelie bins. Crushing a lithium battery is not a good idea, and there have been a 62% increase in bin lorry fires in the UK and regular fires at waste transfer stations across West London, disrupting services and putting workers at risk. So, Mr. Mayor, of course disposable vapes should be banned. Everyone says so. The Local Government Association, the World Health Organization, the RSPCA, because of the detrimental impact on wildlife. In fact, the Lib Dems need to catch up because even the government says they should be banned. So look, the government should just get on with it, and the Lib Dems should come up with a few new ideas. But there's so much more the government could do to deal with pollution from vapes, not just single-use variety. Why aren't manufacturers made to pay in full for recycling these products, for undoing the damage to our environment? How do they get away with this? I'll tell you how they get away with it. It's because the government bottled it. Extended producer responsibility is the idea that manufacturers should be charged based on the amount of packaging they produce and the cost of recycling their products. This would be a game changer for our climate. The government spent years promising to change the law to make the polluter pay, but when it came to it, they bottled it. And talking of bottles, they were going to bring in a deposit return scheme for glass bottles, but they U-turned on that too. They're always bottling it on the environment. E-bikes and e-scooters can help reduce air pollution from cars, but we don't have the right laws in place to regulate parking, speeding and pavement cycling. The government promised a new transport bill to fix this, but they've bottled this too. And then there's the failure to ensure energy security for our country. They're clinging on to oil and gas when they need to back Labour's plan to bring energy bills down by switching to renewables. And where is the retrofitting programme we need to stop Britain's leaky homes pumping out wasted heat? Instead of taking the big, bold action our country and our climate needs, this disposable Tory government are wasting the fag end of their time in office, stopping low-paid Brits from falling in love with foreigners and passing Orwell-esque laws that say black is white. Mr. Mayor, I know the Prime Minister dislikes smoking, as do I, but the Conservatives are addicted to cynical short-term policies that set out to stoke division in our communities. They don't have the vision, the backbone, or even the votes of their own MPs to make the long-term decisions this country needs to deal with the climate emergency. So let's break this filthy habit. Let's kick out the Tories and elect a transformational Labour government in 2024. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Conti, right next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There is undoubtedly an important role for e-cigarettes in helping people stop smoking. Despite only 12.7% of the population still smoking, it is the single most entirely preventable cause of ill health, disability, and death in the UK. And I can't think of any other consumer product that results in the death or contributes to the death of 2/3 of the people that use it. However, the risk with e-cigarettes, in particular with disposable vapes, is that they've become a gateway to smoking and to nicotine addiction, and also an alternative to smoking for people who were never going to smoke in the first place. And I think that's a real concern, in particular when it comes to young people. And I think it's already been mentioned tonight that sadly 1 in 5 children between the ages of 11 and 18 have used vapes. And that has tripled in the last couple of years. And I think that's something that really needs addressing. And never mind sort of the health impacts, the impacts on young people, we see the impacts of these disposable vapes all the time. We walk around, you see them on the floor, you see them in parks, in our waterways, and with 5 million every week going to landfill, that's a huge environmental impact. And so action really needs to happen on this. Now, there has been a consultation on all elements to do with vaping, in particular with youth vaping that just closed on the 6th of December. And that did include the possibility of restricting and banning the sale of disposable vapes. So I do hope that the government come forward quickly with recommendations and action from the consultation that has just concluded. In terms of the motion tonight, we will be supporting the motion and the amendment because we think it's really important that action needs to be taken on disposable vapes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to go back one because I missed him. Councillor Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It strikes me that disposable vapes, are one of the pernicious things in our society now. Disposable by their very nature, but contributing massive amounts of waste, but solvable through legislation, through education, through enforcement. The amendment talks about tens of thousands have been seized, and that's great enforcement action. But we can also need to know that the Chartered Institute of Trading Standards and the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health Officers asked for specific funding to address shortages in key labour workforce supply for the government, and were completely ignored. They wrote to the minister, completely ignored, didn't get that funding for a dedicated apprenticeship scheme that would support that crucial element. Public health is important. Health and Social Care Act actually made one of the most significant transfers of service responsibilities that's been seen in decades to local councils in 2012 under coalition government. But what didn't come with that came the responsibility, but not the funding. And it was another example of responsibly shunting, but cost reductions, well, expense reductions on councils. Now, since then, in the last 8 years, public health funding, but in real terms, by the local government association has been cut by, in real terms, £770 million across the country. So if we want to talk about health, education, better education for our children, then we should be funding these services properly. Don't shunt them onto local councils and then undermine the funding for them. Legislation, local government association has already asked and lobbied for changes, and that was done early this year. So the Liberal Democrats need to catch up. That's already in hand. If we were in the EU, there's regulations already in the EU to come into force shortly about disposable vapes. Sadly, we're not there, are we? Other EU countries have also taken the step ahead of that. So this is a very laudable motion, but missing so many key facts about why there's a problem in health, in enforcement, and in legislation, and failing to address those responses there. So let's support the amendment, which does recognise the valuable work we're doing as a council. Thank you.
Councillor Mafuji, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apple, bubblegum, grape, strawberry, caramel, mint, menthol, raspberry, lemon. These aren't chewing gum flavours. They're flavours of the most popular flavours for vapes, according to a recent survey. I think it tells you everything you need to know about what on earth these vapes, who on earth these vapes are aimed at. Now, you can take up smoking without the tar or the smelly clothes and breath, and in fact come out smelling of roses with this stuff. But it's no wonder that they're with multicoloured cases and sweet tasting and smelling flavours, they're a real draw for under 18s. The creators of these products are often literally targeting them by design. What's even more sickening in vendors is the vendors who purposefully sell them to the under 18s as well. As the former cabinet member with responsibility for removing illegal vapes off our streets, I'm proud of the exemplary work that our training standards teams. And I've joined them on a number of visits, as I wanted to spend a bit of time and just to congratulate them on their area of work. Impressively, last year, more than 18,000 illegal vapes were seized from one raid alone, one of the largest ever inland seizures in the UK by a local trading standards authority. But moreover, as one of my last achievements before leaving the portfolio and handing the reins on to the excellent Louise Brett, was to get the team to do some test purchases with a teenager to see which shops were selling these illegal vapes to minors. Because it had come to my knowledge that there was one particular shop that I was aware of that were actually not just selling it to young people, but they were selling it to young people in their school uniform straight after school. Sadly, that information turned out to be absolutely correct. The test purchases that they made showed that resulted that they were selling illegal vapes to minors. And I've got to say the team have to be applauded for what they've done. And I'm really grateful for the Lib Dems for the opportunity to highlight the excellent work that we are doing as a local authority on this topic. And I'm glad that they're finally catching up with what we've done. But look, we've heard this evening, this is what we're doing. We're one of the top leading boroughs on this in the country. And what are they saying? They're saying we have to put all available resources to do this. So what are you actually saying? We're already doing this as at an exemplary level. Are you suggesting that we should be taking money away from policing to tackle violence against women and girls to do more of this? Are you suggesting that we should be taking money away from other services to pay for more of this? Please do explain yourself when you get the chance at the end of the motion, because, Mr. Mayor, no doubt for the Lib Dems that their interest in this topic is going to go up in a puff of smoke. But we've shown that we've been doing this time and time again, and that we will stay the course on this topic. And so, Mr. Mayor, I simply say I commend the amendment to this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Newsome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and apologies for getting ahead of myself earlier. That was my error not being able to read the order. So thank you. You'll get no argument from us, obviously, on the ill impact of vapes, and I thank Councillor Driscoll and Mahfouz, because it's getting a bit cosy there with Councillor Conti's contribution. We are deeply concerned about the uptake of underage children now vaping, and this uptake is no accident. It is due to the deliberate, cynical, and frankly criminal efforts to target children and addict them to something that has absolutely no value for them and is likely to cause them considerable harm. And it is clear that the Tory government, despite their rhetoric, is taking too little action to stop the vape companies. A cursory Google search might suggest why. Could it be perhaps something to do with the fact that the Conservative Party recently accepted a donation of £400,000 from the chief exec of a company called Supreme 8? And what does Supreme 8 make, you might ask? Well, dear listener, they sell vapes, disposable and brightly coloured vapes that target our children. One particular range includes sour blue raz, pink lemonade, strawberry kiwi, and cotton candy, and they come in a beautiful array of colours. Looking at the wholesaler side, it's fascinating to see that they were developed to, and I quote, fill a largely underserved disposable segment in retailer, lower cost but still high quality. I simply cannot imagine who these might be targeted at. And the company can easily afford their chunky contribution to Conservative coffers, as they boast of selling 5 million bottles of e-liquid a month. That's a lot of newly addicted teenagers that you need to procure. Another big player in the vape market is Juul Labs, a company blamed for fueling an epidemic of youth vaping in the US and fined billions accordingly. By contrast, here in the UK, they are welcomed by the government with open arms, having been included in government briefings on efforts to restrict free vape samples being given to children. Absolutely staggering that a company has done so much to actively promote vaping to children would be hailed as part of the solution. But I guess that's how this government rolls. Support those that donate most of the party. Support the friends who make millions on dodgy public contracts procured through the VIP lane. Tear themselves apart rather than fixing the cost of living crisis. Take RAF jets to far-right festivals in Italy and sneer at the rest of us when we object. Underage vaping is an epidemic that has swept the nation, and only now are proposals being consulted on to restrict flavours and regulate packaging. It feels like too little, too late, a trite response to an enormous problem that yet again we as local authorities must try and deal with. How I look forward to a Labour government that will put the interests of the public and the health of our children and young people first, and we can put this corrupt, morally bankrupt excuse for a government behind us.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think no one would disagree with what the opposition are talking about tonight. And in fact, we are working, as my colleagues have said. Councillor Costigan has written to the Secretary of State to ask about banning the use of single vapes. Councillor Blacker has also written about smoking. Our own trading services have been out talking to retailers about selling products that are illegal. We've actually, as Councillor Mahfouz said, we've been seizing illegal vapes since 1921. We've seized 40,000. So we're busy working on all these things. Now, why, I don't know. The Liberals are making so much fuss about this because, as Councillor Blacker said, there's some much more important things going on in society, especially in Ealing, and affecting people that they could do. I think Councillor Malcolm sometimes asks me what I'd give them out of 10. Well, tonight I think I'd give them a 2 or a 3, and that's being generous. They have to do, as Councillor Louise Brett said, go away and do a bit more work. Even talk to the Conservatives about being a useful opposition. I think they've got a bit more learning to do. We're not disagreeing with the subject. We all know it's really important, and we don't want our young people doing this, but we know that young people are attracted to things that they shouldn't be doing. In fact, we've got a public awareness campaign next year, which I'm sure you'll be supporting as well. So we're doing all these things. We're tackling all of this, and we're glad that you're aware of it and want to help us. But let's come back next year with some new ideas, and I support this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd also like to thank the Lib Democrats in Sheffield mainly, because this is a remarkably similar motion. I'm surprised actually that the main opposition here in Ealing didn't check it a little bit more thoroughly and just sort of see the council's record on this over the last 2 or 3 years. In fact, this motion really highlights, the strategy that the Lib Dems are sort of bringing to the local media and to try and get attention of residents right across the borough, I think. First of all, carefully identify amongst all the issues that there are across the borough, something the council's doing, something that the council's already doing well and has a record on. Secondly, write in your press release, have it ready to go to one of the local websites nearby, claim credit for it. Put a photograph of your group members in it, looking sad or happy, just as applicable, delete as appropriate.
He's smiling, he knows.
Yeah. Finally, claim the credit with a nice catchy headline, something along the lines of Lib Dems call for something that's already being done to happen. I'll bet that this press release is actually sitting in somebody's outbox right now, or just waiting to be sent. However, the last point is that the residents of Ealing aren't fooled by this. You know, you have to give them a bit more credit than that, just on face value. And that actually pursuing this sort of strategy over the next sort of 2.5 years could well lead to them being relegated back to the second opposition group in May 2026. Now, to deal with vaping, just briefly, as it is the motion after all, I'd like to highlight some of the good work that's going on in the borough. First of all, you know, as Councillor Johnson rightly says, you know, this is an important public health issue, and something that it is what we should be discussing here this evening. I'm pleased that by amending this motion, the Labour administration can actually strengthen it and highlight the action that is going on, and that has been going on for a couple of years or more. As recently in July this year, my colleague Councillor Brett was out on Operation Cersei, I think it's pronounced, which resulted in the seizure of over 19,000 illicit cigarettes and over 700 oversized vapes. Now, I am very grateful to the council officers, the dedicated council officers, the trading standards people, and the police who go out and do this work. And this is something that comes up at the licensing committee on which I sit on a regular basis. We want them to continue this because they're very good at it. In September 2022, one of the largest operations in the country seized over 18,000 illicit vapes. And as Councillor Johnson highlighted, you know, well over 40,000 vapes have been seized over the last 2.5 years. Now, the amendments also help highlight that we have very recently been awarded funding for a project which is catchily titled, I'll check it so I get it right, Trading Standards Initiative to Tackle Underage Vapes Use and Availability of Illicit Tobacco Products. Yeah. Now, what this will do is allow more operations, such as Operation Cersei, that Councillor Brett was on and highlighted, to take place, so that we can make sure shopkeepers are being responsible and that we're targeting businesses that are operating illegally and targeting vulnerable people, particularly children and under 18s.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll have to end it. That's 1 minute.
I will recommend the amendments.
Thank you. So, Councillor Madison, you have 3 minutes.
I defer to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Donnelly, you have 3 minutes.
I also defer.
It's all going on a puff of smoke here, isn't it? Councillor Blacker, do you want to sum up?
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to the colleagues who decided I should speak sooner than expected. Look, Mr. Mayor, it turns out we all agree on this. The Lib Dems are slightly sneaky in forgetting to put in their motion some of the things that we have been doing, as Councillor Shaw highlighted. But this would have been perfect motion not for debate. We could have then spent our time more usefully having those big discussions, just a few months away from a general election, about the visions we have for our countries. Presumably the Lib Dems will stand for something at some point. And the Tories could have told us how they're going to try desperately to cling on to a few seats at least, but we didn't. So can I thank all the colleagues who kind of highlighted the fantastic work we do. And I would, just to borrow a phrase from Councillor Johnson, suggest that she might be being just a little wicked in her scoring. I think they deserve at least a 3.5 rather than a 2 or a 3. But thank you everyone for their support, even to the Tories who are finally voting for something this evening rather than just abstaining on amendments. And I hope to see everyone voting for the motion as amended at the end.
Thank you. Councillor Hirsch, do you want to sum up the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very pleased to hear that there are no fans in here for disposable vapes, and everybody's clear how distractive and dangerous they are. I'm equally pleased to hear there are a lot of efforts already done by our council officer to actually stop illegal trading of these horrible things. But I would like to see the council to extend its efforts into licensing officers office, licensing officer, in order to send a stronger signal to traders now and not wait for legal kind of legislations to come down the line sometime in the future. This kind of licensing kind of element was actually deleted from the motion by the Labour group, besides the fact that is something we could actually additionally do in order to really stop these horrible things to be sold to our youngsters in the borough. I would like to commend the whole motion to the council. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, councillor. All right. So first of all, we're going to move to the vote now. An amendment has been moved and seconded, and therefore go to the vote on the amendment first and then the motion. So all those in favour of the amendment. Oh, that you as well. Okay. So those against, those abstentions, no. Is it? And therefore the amendment's carried. The main vote? I mean, that's the main vote. Move to the vote on the main motion as amendment. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? So therefore that motion therefore carried. So we've got no time for a fag break, so we're going to move on to the next item. That just went up in smoke. It's like license fees. All right. I call therefore, this is the majority group motion for debate. I call on Councillor Donnelly to move the majority group motion for debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think very unfairly, some colleagues don't consider me one of life's natural optimists. But it might be said that our motion, by some, that our motion was tabled more in hope than expectation in terms of the effects that we're calling for and the people from whom we're seeking action. Why should we expect a government that has trashed local authority finances for a decade and a half to see the light at this late stage? In any event, life moves pretty fast, and yesterday's draft local government settlement indeed shows that nothing has changed and that the crisis in local government finances only worsens. The headline figures of the settlement are designed to suggest that a generous government will bestow an inflation-matching 6.5% increase for councils across England. But that figure obscures the reality that councils' costs across the country are rising way ahead of that, and that half of the 6.5% is assumed to come not from central government, but from a predetermined increase in council tax and yet another year of the social care precept, the ultimate short-term fix that hasn't fixed anything. Dozens of councils are on a knife edge, with Section 114 quasi-bankruptcy notices being delivered across the country and in administrations run by every party. Many more are not far behind, and in most cases, this will not be the result of maladministration or gross incompetence, nor will any commissioners sent into those councils find the issues readily resolvable. Councils are failing in the face of the intolerable rises in the cost of social care, including what the Tory chair of the Commons Education Committee calls the existential threat of children's social care costs. What we have is the worst of all worlds, money stripped away from general funding of universal services towards social care, but those overall funding levels for social care are falling further and further behind demand as our costs far outstrip inflation. We've reached a point, Mr. Mayor, which on current trends, next year, getting on for 60% of our budget is likely to be spent on social care. And only 4 years ago, that figure was 40%. Services which, although vital in a civilized society, are largely invisible to most of our residents. Meanwhile, inexorably, the money available to fund the rest of the council services is squeezed. And the government's response, no new money at all for social care, and a big reduction in the grant for general services. Are these people oblivious to the crisis or merely indifferent? It goes without saying that here in Ealing, we will step up to the challenge. We will manage our finances effectively. We will protect our vulnerable residents, and we will run well-managed services for everyone in Ealing. But unless and until real leadership is shown at Westminster, on current trends, every council will go under sooner or later. That's not scaremongering, Mr. Mayor. It's the brutal reality we face. The time for action is now. The only change that will give the people of Ealing the services on which they depend is a new government, a Labour government, and that can't come soon enough. I move the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Mason, want to second the motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I wish to formally second the motion and reserve my right to speak later in the debate.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Malcolm, you have an amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We can see this comes in two parts when it comes to council finances. There is the direct council finances that we can control, and we can see that there are a number of aspects of our current finances which are very worrying. Some of them have not been mentioned tonight. The reserves are very low compared to many years ago that we've seen, although recently they were increased, but overall over the past 5 or 10 years they've been reduced. Many areas are constantly overspent versus target. Some of the services are very difficult to manage because they're very needs-based, and so the adult social care spends are often out of control versus the forecasts year in and year out, and that doesn't give much confidence in the budgeting that we have to do. Residents are still reporting huge numbers of issues with many of the systems that we have, like repairs. So we are spending our money, and we do have a smaller amount of it, but there is a lot of flexibility and influence that we still have as councils. We can't on one hand say we have no money and then come up with a 4-year proposal which has 80 or so large propositions that it's trying to invest upon. That's a lot of money that we are trying to spend and manage. So that needs to be borne when we're doing this. But I think the mover of the motion quite rightfully puts a lot of the blame on the government. And so many councils, as he said, are essentially bankrupted or near that point. Councillor Donnelly, it is true that in the next couple of years, many councils will be issuing the Section 141. Adult social care as a topic is one that can only be fixed nationally, and there are many MPs from many sides in the House of Parliament who do genuinely are experts in that area and do want to work together to formulate a change in the government rules where we can actually change those laws in the future. But time after time, different prime ministers, different ministers have given up on that particular task. But I think for that to work, we can only do so much at a council level, but the government needs to step up and work with everyone from all sides to do that. And it seems every single year, another opportunity has been missed. Then we come to another government failing, the B word, Brexit. The effects of Brexit were said not to be that bad or they're actually be positive. Well, evidence that has come to light that we see all the time. We now see the effect on GDP is 3 or 4% in many of the studies that have been shown recently. We can see that's really obvious when we look at the holes in our workforce that we're trying to recruit because of those people who've moved back to Europe, who used to work here and be loved in this country. We've seen the higher export costs that we're seeing and import costs, which are really crippling business. Businesses fail to be able to invest with confidence, knowing that Brexit has hit them and their companies. There is huge increases in both the rents and the mortgages, which I think were mentioned earlier. The cost of living due to Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, thank you, has really hit home. The research is that people are struggling now and have been struggling for the last year or two, but they do not see any confidence in the future. The Lib Dem amendment looks to see how we can better fund councils in a more stable way, and we hope that the administration would agree with that. We do need a general election, and we hope the government will change after that general election. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, next up is Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We support most of this motion. Local government funding needs to be given priority by the next government, or else more and more councils will need to make cuts to essential services, vulnerable residents, and ultimately more councils will be forced into Section 114, which is a disaster for their residents. And above and beyond the general need for an increase, London boroughs need to get a fair settlement to reflect the particular challenges we face, including our social care costs and spiralling temporary housing spending driven by private landlords selling up because interest rates have gone up. There needs to be a fair funding review looking at both formulas and underlying data to recognise these specific costs. We submitted an amendment to this motion partly to remove the call for a Labour government, which is not something that's wise to include in a motion seeking cross-party support, but mainly to make the point that in addition to more funding, local government needs more predictable funding. Next year's settlement, announced yesterday, continues a £4 billion funding gap for local councils and is, for the sixth time in a row, merely a one-year settlement. Local government cannot work efficiently a year at a time, with single-year settlements augmented by one-off bidding pots. Councils need to be able to plan strategically, which the three-year settlement we call for in our amendment would allow. This year's funding settlement also contains a pointless political dig at the four-day week successfully piloted by the Lib Dem administration of South Cambridgeshire, which has improved staff retention and saved £500,000 on agency workers. The Conservative government says local government should innovate, but punishes it for doing so. Finally, Mr. Mayor, I return to the main thrust of the motion. Liz Truss crashed the economy and pushed interest rates up. Local government is suffering from the effects of that on top of wholly inadequate single-year settlements year after year. Ealing settlement is worse than many other councils. Local government needs a fair deal. Ealing residents deserve a fair deal. Please support our amendment and the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. Next up is Councillor Brett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Children's services, social care and schools, housing, licensing, waste collection and pest control. All are just some of the small number of many functions of local governments. It's all of these crucial services that feel the pinch when council budgets are strained. Local services are facing a significant budgetary pressures after 14 years of Tory cuts, and councils are desperately trying to provide urgent fiscal preservation on a shoestring budget. Many councils across the country, and indeed Ealing, are especially hard hit by cuts to local government of 56%, compared with other areas like Wokingham, which is only seeing 3%. This comes as no surprise when the Tory Prime Minister has boasted about taking money from urban areas and putting it into more prosperous rural councils. Despite being a raw deal in Ealing, we are making the difficult decisions necessary to balance the budget. But not all councils have fared so well, given so many have had to issue Section 114 notices. With inadequate, insecure and unsustainable funding from successive Tory governments, councils are being expected to claw back money from residents via council tax during a period of stagnant wages, spiralling costs of living, and as a result, worsening personal finances for many residents. This simply isn't tenable. Ealing residents must not be forced to pay for the crisis made in Downing Street. Clearly, Councillor Malcolm doesn't really have an understanding of how council budgets work. In order to plan for the long term, councils must have reliable funding. Small pots of money for councils to scramble over in the race to the bottom bidding process is not a sustainable way for local government to operate. If this Tory government can't step up and deliver for councils, then they should call it a general election so the country can vote for a Labour government that will. Labour in power would move towards a longer-term funding settlements for councils, so we have stability, transparency to deliver to our residents. We will push power out of Westminster and empower local authorities to make their best of their budgets and give them local autonomy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Haley, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for reminding me. I've got 3 minutes. I won't waste my time like I always do. I'll stick to my notes. As we all know, council plays a vital role in delivering essential services. It's also been an important presence in the local communities, representing the diverse interest of residents. However, it's also disheartening to witness the continuous funding cuts imposed on local authorities by the Tory government nearly 14 years now. This is a deliberate reduction in financial support that has left many councils on the brink of collapse, leading to an increase in the use of Section 114 notice across various political affiliations. Mr. Mayor, Nottingham, Croydon, Thurrock, Birmingham, Slough, Northampton are just a few examples of countless areas where residents have failed by the Conservative economic mismanagement. It's also alarming to note that the number of bankruptcy among local authorities is constantly rising, reaching a total of 7 and counting. This is also a damning statement that highlights the long-lasting impact of sustained and systematic austerity measures on our communities. While I applaud Ealing Council have been able to manage a balanced budget despite facing a significant 56% real terms cuts since 2010, it also has to require to make a serious difficult decisions along the way. Vital services, including housing, children's services, and adult social care requires an urgent financial preservation to continue to safeguard the most vulnerable members of our borough. It's also simply untenable to force councils to further reduce essential services and burden residents with increased council tax. Nearly 14 years of Tory austerity. It's also unjust to make Ealing residents to pay the prices for the crisis created by the government in Downing Street. As a Labour government, we are very committed to supporting local councils where the current government has extremely failed. We believe in embedding transparency within the interaction of different tiers of government and moving towards long-term integrated funding settlements. Economic growth is an utmost importance, and which is why the Labour's mission to get Britain building again is ensuring that local government have the necessary tools to meet the service demands, as well as considering projects that will stimulate growth. Is also crucial to our mission of levelling up society. We firmly believe that the council should be empowered by the central government to develop credible long-term growth plans. If this current Tory government is not prepared to accommodate this, it's time to call a general election so the country can have the opportunity to vote for a Labour government that will not only prioritise the needs, but also aspirations of our local communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next up, Councillor Wesson.
Mr. Mayor, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in this debate this evening. I want to start off by offering my tributes to former councillor Phil Portwood. His commitment to public service was lifelong, and he will be missed by many. Now, I'm sure all members of all parties would agree that we come into local government for its possibilities, to make a positive difference every day in people's lives across the borough. But the reality we're facing, thanks to brutal cuts from the government, is staggering. The Tories have cut Ealing's funding by 40% in cash terms and 56% in real terms. It means that too often we are faced with unenviable decisions, ones which inevitably result in reduced services and support for our community. After 13 years of neglect and undue pressure to make savings, this Tory government has pushed local government to collapse. Since 2018, 8 councils have issued Section 114 notices, effectively declaring themselves bankrupt, with another 1 in 5 councils expected to do so too. As Councillor Donnelly said, we spend the majority of our resources supporting those who really need our support. Adult social care has faced over a decade of underfunding, and unmet need has grown. The social care grant announced yesterday, put simply, is not enough. It's a constant struggle for councils to keep up with demographic and inflationary pressures. Every person deserves dignity and security in older age. And that's why it's so critical that the government comes up with a long-term sustainable plan for social care now. We cannot wait another moment. So let's step forward in time to think what local government could look like, or at its best, when it's not deprived of the resources it needs. Angela Rayner, Labour's deputy leader, has said Labour seeks power to shift it back to people. Under Labour, communities like ours will get control of their futures, and areas will get new devolved powers on skills, employment support, and housing. This would give boroughs like ours the tools we really need to develop our own long-term growth plans. So, Mr. Mayor, we've just heard the delightful news that the odious Peter Bone has been removed as an MP. Now, let me tell you this. All I want for Christmas is a Labour government to make our plans a reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Young, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can see from the text of this motion that the Labour group are in dire need of a quick history lesson in government economics. We should start in 2001, when Britain still had a budget surplus. Gordon Brown then stated his objective of doubling public expenditure, and he began a massive expansion in public spending. Despite this, council tax bills in England doubled during the last Labour government, and there wasn't a single year when Ealing Council didn't have to make savings in its budget. These increases in public spending were funded through increased borrowing, and the result was a massive increase in public deficits, which broke the government's own fiscal rules just prior to the 2008 financial and economic crisis. This caused an unprecedented deterioration in public finances. At the same time, according to the Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies, the vast majority of other leading industrial countries were reducing their borrowing and reducing their debt, which left the UK in a much worse position than most comparable countries. The late, much respected Alistair Darling warned of the risks and urged reining back government expenditure, but Gordon Brown overrode his Chancellor and even increased government spending and borrowing by £20 billion in the face of the recession. The last Labour government left this country spending 30% more than it was receiving in tax receipts, and a note saying there's no money left. Between 2010 and 2015, the coalition government managed to reduce that deficit by 80% in 5 years, a magnificent and necessary achievement, and they achieved it by flatlining, but not by cutting overall government expenditure. At the same time, in Ealing, the Labour Council embraced austerity and froze council tax for year after year, and they were so proud of freezing council tax, they used to proclaim it on banners up and down the Uxbridge Road. This motion not only fails to explain why austerity was necessary, but also fails to mention the substantial increase in funding that there has been in recent years. Ealing core spending power, which includes all forms of funding. Ealing's core spending power, if we include yesterday's announcement, will have increased by 44% over the last 6 years. In short, Mr. Mayor, when this motion talks about problems made in Downing Street, it should explain that these problems it records are a legacy from the last Labour government.
Thank you, Councillor Young. You know how to get things energised in here. Councillor Mason, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And on that topic, you would have thought from that sort of interesting tour de force from Councillor Young that, of course, he'd understand the concept of inflation, which, of course, in real terms has ensured that Ealing Council budget is now over half of what it was all the way back in 2010. £4 billion. £4 billion. That's the overall funding gap just this year and next that the local government say that we need in the system if we are able to deal with the fundamental challenges that we've got in family breakdowns, in an aging society, and homelessness, which is incredibly on the rise, that of course we've discussed already here today. Those challenges have been fundamentally exacerbated by the disastrous economics of ideologues within the Conservative Party, who quite frankly have put sort of their weird, bizarre ideology ahead of working people in the form of Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss. We now have market failures exacerbating inflation, exacerbating interest rates, that is causing all of us to have the consistent challenges that we know that we collectively face. As a local authority, we have been dealing with that situation as best we possibly can. A decade of having to face down diminishing resources in local government whilst need increases, and over the last few years, having to go through a process of trying to second guess a government each year in and out to determine whether or not they're going to shift the goalposts. To the extent that today is the 1-year anniversary of Thurrock heading into its insolvency and its 114 notice, with Northamptonshire and Woking joining them to boot. Now, we've of course had other local authorities go to the wall, and some of our own political persuasion, because as Rishi Sunak, the local government minister turned Treasury Secretary turned Chancellor turned Prime Minister, stood in a garden in Tunbridge Wells and proclaiming to a Tory party faithful fundraiser, quote, "I managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding they deserve." What they mean by that is they have taken money out of the hands and of the pockets of the most deprived communities in this country, which has led to local authorities like Ealing seeing its cut by some 50% in real terms, versus places like Tunbridge Wells and others only seeing single digits, single 3%. Now, we know what the Tories' record in government is, and we're looking forward to kicking them out. But let me spend just a moment talking about the Liberal Democrats, who have become a bit like a political etch-a-sketch, the Ealing equivalent to the Waldorf and Statler of local government. Do more, they say. Do less, they say. Asking us with one hand to increase our spending whilst the other bemoaning that we haven't. At the last cabinet meeting where we discussed the budget, or in fact, the last full cabinet when we last full council meeting where we discussed the budget, they complained that we were putting money into reserves. Councillor Busuttil, their finance person, then turned up at the cabinet meeting and said that we weren't putting enough in reserves, and now Councillor Malcolm says that too. I mean, you couldn't make it up. And even on their own abstention, even on their own amendment to their own motion, Councillor Busuttil and Malcolm vote for it, and Councillor Hirsch abstains. My goodness, what on earth is going on with the Liberal Democrats? I cannot fathom, because what the people of Ealing know, and as we saw even from a contribution from somebody asking us a question earlier on, the public get it. Because they know that they are facing increased heating bills, mortgage costs, rent. They know that the price of milk and bread has gone through the roof under this government, and they are desperate for change. They know that as a Labour council, we are making sure that we are prudent with their money, sensible in the decisions that we take, always, always, always knowing that we put their interests first. But that's going to become increasingly difficult, as it is for so many other local authorities: Somerset, Kingston, Surrey Heath, Havering, Cheshire East. This is descending on all of us. The only thing at this stage that it will make any material difference to the future fundamental sustainability of local government and the vital services that this borough and the people of this borough rely on is a Labour government. And we are going to get that opportunity that next year. I commend the motion.
Councillor Buckley.
Mr. Mayor, if you are wondering what Mike, the headless chicken, is doing, and I mean the headless Conservative government, I can explain. After 13 years of failing Britain, the headless conservative flock are visibly running out of touch. Nothing on the cost of living crisis, nothing on the NHS, nothing for struggling breadwinners. No wonder millions of UK families are compelled to take loans simply to meet their most basic needs, to pay energy bills and put food on the table. Mr. Mayor, a few days ago, Rishi Sunak lost his temper and showed no empathy when reminded by Keir Starmer of the 140,000 homeless children in the UK at Christmas. Similarly, many Ealing families won't be celebrating Christmas in their homes, but in shelters and temporary accommodations, thanks to this Tory government's financial failures that left them unable to meet mortgage payments and unable to pay rents, which led to the loss of their homes. Mr. Mayor, the other day, I received a call from a family recently evicted from their home, now facing the harsh reality of spending Christmas in temporary accommodation. The gravity of this situation is even more poignant, as the children in this family will not have their familiar toys or the joy of unwrapping new ones under a Christmas tree during this festive season. This family story echoes the stark reality across our nation, and the blame for all this belongs firmly at the door of this Tory government in Westminster. Mr. Mayor, for 13 years, Labour councils have borne the brunt of Tory austerity, where many councils now face a funding gap of almost £3 billion over the next 2 years, and the prospect of having to decide if they need to cut valued services that communities rely on, such as bin collections, street lighting, social care, and many more. Likewise, Ealing Council has had its unfair share of budget cuts. Despite the financial constraints imposed, Ealing Council demonstrated a remarkable commitment to maintaining essential services and upholding the well-being of people in our borough. Here in Ealing, we are standing on our feet and ask nothing from this Conservative flock. We want the general elections to happen today, and the Labour government will usher in the transformative changes that our country needs, growing the economy, delivering better living standards, and make Britain work for working people. Finally, Mr. Mayor, let's get Britain's future back. Let's get a Labour government. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rice, next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, we as councillors have those conversations all the time. Our residents cannot understand why we cannot provide what they see as essential services, and our explanation is always the same: austerity, government cuts. However, we are reaching the point where everyone understands. And I met a resident at a coffee morning a couple of weeks ago, and he explained the situation to me better than I could. And my goodness, he did explain to me how much we needed a Labour government in this country. Robert Colville wrote in the Sunday Times at the weekend about those councils which have already gone bust and the reasons why it's become so difficult for councils in a climate of underfunding. Colville called those reasons the frightful four: adult social care, children's services, home to school transport, and also homeless accommodation. There is always a case for prevention is better than cure, and that is true for local government finances. However, if central government would only fund us councils properly, then we'll be able to put that prevention into action and stop the cure from squeezing all the other budgets for what our residents expect to receive from us. An excellent example from Robert Colville is how councils are spending £740 million a year on temporary accommodation. This is versus a budget of just £666 million a year on new affordable housing. It doesn't take a genius to work out that building affordable housing would be the solution. However, we as councillors despair at the amount that has to be spent on temporary homes to residents when the affordable housing simply isn't there. The County Council's network warned recently about impending insolvency for so many of our councils. The network focused on the spiralling school transport budgets for SEND children, and their report warned that the cost of providing SEND school transport will almost triple over the decade as the number of eligible children increases. And increasingly, the complexity of children's needs means that taxes are required to make that journey. Inflation and other rising costs blight the lives of so many everywhere. And that leads to Rishi Sunak, Jeremy Hunt and others allowing those rising costs to hurt local government and hurt our residents. And why should Ealing pay the price? We had hoped from the provisional local government finance settlement that even the Conservative government had heard our voices and seen the spread of Section 114 notices across the country and may even wish to finally do something about it. But no new money. With costs continuing to rise, why should residents pay the 6.5% in council tax? There is one sticking plaster for all of this, and that is for the Chancellor to reverse all those years of cuts. And there is one ultimate cure, and that is for a Labour government and for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves to manage our economy for the whole country. I commend the motion and I opt for the ultimate cure. I call for a general election and the end of Tory mismanagement now. Labour is ready to serve.
Councillor now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, today we gather to address a critical issue that has been plaguing our community, the devastating impact of budget cuts on our local services and the exacerbation of inequalities that have left vulnerable residents bearing the brunt of austerity. The statistics are stark and the consequences dire. Ealing Council has faced a nearly 56% real terms cut in its budget since 2010, thanks to successive Conservative governments. Mr. Mayor, the burden placed on our residents who are paying the price for a crushed economy is unjust and untenable. The impact of budget cuts goes beyond financial constraints. Organizations working with victims of sexual and domestic abuse have reported cutting essential services due to funding crisis. Refuge space is insufficient, and victims struggle to access the support they desperately need. The burden of austerity falls disproportionately on the BAME women, compounding existing inequalities. Mr. Mayor, these budget cuts have not even spared our police services. Tory austerity policies have severely impacted police resources, hindering our ability to maintain public safety. In the face of these challenges, our council has endeavoured to balance the budget through difficult decisions. However, Mr. Mayor, the relentless demand for crucial services persists, while our resources dwindle. This is not a unique struggle. Councils across the country are grappling with the same issue, with some already issuing Section 114 notices due to the sustained underfunding. Mr. Mayor, our resolution is clear. Our residents deserve a fair deal. It is time for the government to step up and provide the resources necessary for our council to deliver vital services. Housing, children's services, and adult social care must be preserved urgently to protect the vulnerable in our borough. Sustainable funding for local government is not just a necessity, Mr. Mayor, it is a moral imperative. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Blackett, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor. I know Councillor Donnelly is itching to give the Lib Dems a bit of a lesson, so I'll keep it very brief and merely kind of take umbrage with one thing that I heard, that social care budgets were out of control. And now our budget's no more out of control than the social care market itself is broken, and fundamentally so. The fair cost of care exercise that the government ran asked the market how much it wanted to be paid and expected us to make up the difference with no additional funding. No, that's not fair, because funding was supposed to follow. It was supposed to follow with a social care levy on national insurance proposed by Prime Minister Johnson, if you remember him. But of course that was scrapped and no further funding followed as a result. Local taxpayers now are expected to make up the shortfall, just as local taxpayers are supposed to pick up the pieces of a broken market in children's social care and all the other elements of the homelessness rise that we've seen recently in funding the cost of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, that I think was also mentioned at Cabinet not that long ago when the Lib Dems tried to make a political point of it, possibly the Tories. I get them confused sometimes. But that is all I'll say. That it's fundamentally, we are grappling with issues that we cannot control. The only people that can control them and impose any kind of solution is the government. The current Tory one is failing to do so. And I look forward, as do my colleagues, to a Labour one in 2024.
Thank you. Councillor Ball, you want to sum up the amendment? Sorry, Councillor Malcolm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I was reading a survey a few weeks ago which talked about what people were thinking in the country, and an amazing 6 in 10 people were worried about keeping warm this winter. Now, that's not surprising given what Liz Truss did to our economy, but it is shocking and a disgrace that families in Ealing, in London, in the country are having to decide between food and fuel. And many people in Ealing have to make that decision, sadly. 1 in 5 people in that same survey reported they were borrowing more and more on their credit cards. Now, everyone to some degree uses their credit cards for regular spending, but we're talking excess spending here. They're putting off items they can't really afford for another day. And we know that credit card debt with a high interest rate just mounts up, and that's going to cripple many of the lives of many families in Ealing. The situation is very stark, and one of the suggestions in the amendment is about the idea of that 1 year settlement is what leads to this council and many councils cutting services that it may not have needed to if it had a more sustainable funding source. And that's where the 3 year settlement can obviously help in that situation. Councillor Brett, you mentioned that, and that's what I actually said in the amendment. So I actually agree with you, and you seem to agree with me on that particular issue, despite your comments. So, Mr. Mayor, I think let's have a general election and get rid of the Tories, and then hopefully some of those issues with adult care, which I've referred to and the portfolio holder have, can actually be solved.
Thank you, Councillor. And to sum up the motion, Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Mason for taking some of the heat, what might otherwise have been an explosion in my head when my one good ear picked up Councillor Malcolm bemoaning our levels of reserves, levels against which he and his group have voted in 2 consecutive years when I've had the honour of moving this Labour administration's budget. And okay, you might think, well, it was just one of a lot of things in the budget. Councillor Malcolm made a point of opposing the budget 2 years ago because it specifically committed to raise our reserves in a modest but necessary way, a way which I and this administration continues to think of as prudent. But as Councillor Mason says, every so often, the same group of people come to us and accuse us of having reserves which are too low. I mean, it would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. Councillor Ball, I have a degree of sympathy with the argument around single year and multi-year funding. Broadly speaking, I think we're on the same page. I'm not sure how this government would have handled that in the context of the surge of inflation. Could we have trusted them to make the necessary tweak in the context of a 3 year, 4 year settlement? I don't know. In terms, though, Councillor Malcolm, of whether we agree with the wording of the amendment, just as Councillor Ball said to us that including the word Labour wouldn't be a way to gain support around the chamber, I would suggest to him that deleting the word Labour is not a way to gain the support of the majority administration, and we'll be voting against the amendment. Back to Councillor Young, who in the spirit of recycling has been giving the same speech about Gordon Brown for years. I want to make a serious point about debt levels. The reason that George Osborne gave for plunging us into a decade of austerity was that debt was too high and it would be reduced by those means. It was not. Debt has never been higher. They've never brought it down. And if councils like Ealing back in the day had a fault, it was that they perhaps believed the lie that austerity would be short-term, would be temporary, and that therefore protecting those people who were suffering from austerity from rises in council tax would be a fair and proper thing to do. In the end, we've been proved perhaps to have been unwise in taking the government's word for it. It's not a mistake, I think, that we've made ever since. Fundamentally, as Councillor Mason said, we've been in a generation of government which has sought to redistribute money from the poor to the rich, because it's failed absolutely to generate real new wealth, real levelling up of the type that Councillor Haley was talking about. So let's move forward with the motion unamended, and I recommend it to the chamber. Yeah.
Right. So first of all, the amendment has been moved and seconded, and therefore we'll go to the vote on the amendments first and then the motion. So all those in favour of the amendment? Okay, all those against? Any abstentions? Hang on, can I just clarify? Sorry, can I just clarify that, please? I thought you voted against. So hang on. Just let me just do that again. So there's no. All those in favour of the amendment. Right. All those against. Right. Any abstentions? There you go. Okay, thank you. The amendment is therefore.
Apologies for that.
I'll now move on to vote on the original motion. All those in favour? Those against? And abstentions? Okay, right. The motion is therefore carried. Okay, hang on. Let's just carry on, please. Right, we're going to move on to item 11. Councillor Newsby to move the motion not for debate. Is that correct?
Thank you. I won't keep you because I've already got to speak
There's no
about
speech,
borough
it's not for
culture.
debate.
Oh, well, I was told I could have a few words, but in which case I will, I move the motion that is not for debate about the borough culture that is in my name. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, my mistake. You can say.
Sorry, everyone. This is a really fantastic opportunity for us. We are one of 10 boroughs that has applied, so it is really important that we all get behind the bids. What sets us apart is our brilliant diverse communities and the culture that people have brought with them when they come to Ealing. There is joy to be shared with the world when we have the opportunity to showcase everything that we do. I want to say a huge thank you to all the artists and creators and makers and officers who helped us with the bid, but now it's on all of us to join Dame Judi Dench, Yinki Alori and Ealing Studios to give us the opportunity to widen access to cultural activity and jobs in the borough of Ealing. So that website, one more time, www.ealing2025.org. Get on there and support our bid. Thank you very much.
Okay, is that motion actually seconded?
I'm happy to second the motion. Thank you.
All right. Is that agreed? Okay. I think that's more plug than a motion, wasn't it? Anyway, annual scrutiny report 22-23. Call on Councillor Gordon to move the annual scrutiny report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to make a long speech. I'm just going to say thank you very much to everybody who took part in scrutiny last year, and thank you for this year. We will be bringing a report again next year, but hopefully a bit earlier in the year. So I commend Council for this report. Thanks.
Okay, is that seconded? Hang on, is that seconded? All right, Councillor Donnelly seconded it. Okay. Is that agreed? Right, and then finally, Treasury Management Report, Q2, 23-24. I call on Councillor Donnelly to move the Treasury Management Report. Is that second? Oh, sorry, call on him to move it first.
First things first, I formally move the report. Mr. Mayor asks council to agree its recommendation and note its recommendations.
Is that seconded?
Seconded.
Is that agreed? Right, there are no urgent key decisions exempted from calling since the last council meeting. Therefore, the meeting is now closed. A Merry Christmas.
Mr. Mayor? Hello?